What's going on, everybody? We're back. It was a long recess. I feel a little rusty. Bear with me as we kick the rust off, whatever you kick rust off of. So, we're back. We're back today for a House Judiciary edition of Dave the Lawyer live stream. We are watching the House Judiciary's hearing on Europe's threat to American speech and innovation, featuring Nigel Farage. So this should be a good one. You know, Nigel really brings in the ladies, so just kidding. Should be a good one, relevant. I'm eager to learn more about the English way of the law, how they do things. You know, I feel like unprepared for this. They don't teach you, England's laws, and I guess American law is based on English common law. Let's just say that. But that's not what you study. You study the American rules, case law, precedent, etc. We don't really go back so far and look into what's going on in England. We're going to get a little glimpse today to see what the heck is going on in Europe. Shouldn't just say England, but I did just read last night someone touched down, I believe it was England, and was immediately arrested for 3 tweets. So that's a little dystopian. All right. Let's get a little hello going on in the chat. A little obligatory ahoy hoy. Maybe a little salute. And then we're just patiently waiting. Hello chat, I missed you. I missed going live. I wanted to see what all the hubbub was about in August. A couple of the streamers were taking a break. I thought, I don't like it. No more breaks. No more letting up. Just preparing the stream. They haven't started yet. It is 10:01 in Washington, D.C. right now. The committee on the House Judiciary has not started. We are waiting patiently. Again, Nigel Farage, a guest on today's panel of witnesses. Well, let me read them off to you. The Right Honourable Nigel Farage, Member of the Parliament of the United Kingdom. Lorcán Price, Barrister, Legal Counsel, Alliance Defending Freedom International, and Morgan Reed, President, the App Association. And might as well read the synopsis to you, too. The House Judiciary Committee, good morning, Jacqueline, will hold a hearing on Wednesday, September 3rd, 2025 at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. The hearing will examine European threats to American free speech and innovation. It will highlight how European online censorship laws, specifically the United Kingdom's UK Online Safety Act and the European Union's Digital Services Act, threaten Americans' right to speak freely online in the United States. Additionally, it will explain how the UK's Digital Markets Competition and Consumer Act, DMCC, and the EU's Digital Markets Act target American companies and hurt innovation. They're making rules that are messing with us, in short. Get your coffee here. Still patiently waiting on a coffee sponsor. All right. Any moment, we can hop on Twitter X and see what the good old committee's doing. So we're at the Judiciary House side of things. We aren't doing, and if things go stale, we can always switch. But simultaneously, I think at 10:15. Morning, Alex. Heyo. Hey. We could always jump over to the nominations. So, who are those nominations going to be? Let's see. Jennifer Mascott to be United States Circuit Judge for the 3rd Circuit. Panel 2, I have to look into this. I think it's because circuits may get their own panels, and then district courts may get their own panels. So panel 2 versus panel 1, one person, Jennifer L. Mascott. Panel 2, Robert Chamberlain, Edmund LaCour, William Lewis, James Maxwell, and Harold Moody III. I don't know if you know any of those people. I think I may recognize Miss Mascot's name. That's right. Miss Mascot was a professor at the Scalia School of Law, and we actually just clipped the video over. And so you can go check that out. Miss Mascot was, I believe, they were talking about maybe, whoa. The dogs remember. I think it was when Schumer, it was recently we clipped it, but it was when Schumer took to the steps of the Supreme Court and was more than complaining, he was kind of threatening Gorsuch and, who was the other one that was on the receiving end of his threats? I want to say it was Kavanaugh. Yeah. You hear me, Gorsuch? You hear me, Kavanaugh? You're going to pay. Something to that effect was not a good look for a senator on the steps of the Supreme Court threatening the Supreme Court justice. You're going to have a bad time. But kind of reminded me the impetus of this channel. Because, when you're watching the news clips of Senator Schumer apologizing for it, the newsreader will be like, Senator Schumer apologized on the Senate floor today, and you got a B-roll of Senator Schumer. It's great. Like, okay, any second now, I'm sure we'll hear his apology. And they just kind of glaze over it, and they move on to the next story immediately, never having heard the words of the apology. And this is not the only time they do this. They use B-roll of these committee hearings, and you'll see, like, emotions running high, Swalwell, like, and Jim Jordan's like, you better not. And the witnesses are like, oh, I don't know. And the news doesn't use any of the audio. They're using some B-roll. They don't show you the clips. And that's how we got here. Good morning. What is this? Yes, ma'am. Good morning. When Americans start using innovation, plebs. Yes, we're not ready. We're not ready for what's coming out of the rest of the world. We've seen how you guys innovate. Is it please? I think you meant, because plebs makes it sound like an insult. When Americans start using word innovation, please? I don't know. We're good. 10:07 in Washington. The committee still has not started yet. Soon we'll call them and bother them. No. Sometimes, occasionally, we'll be able to call in and like, hey, the audio's muted. Huge props for the committee to start all over again when they do. So Senate Judiciary nomination starts at 10:15. They may get started before the 10 o'clock House Judiciary. Saw members were there last night. It looked like Oversight was taking testimony from witnesses, victims, Epstein victims. It kind of blindsided me. I wasn't ready to jump on and cover it. I saw Nancy Mace left. She seemed upset. Luna put out a document dump, 31,000 individual pages, which I understand maybe why you would do that, but okay, do the individual page release dump and then maybe the unabridged connected, one single.
You guys ready to go?
Here we go. I hear Jim Jordan. We're ready. Where's my gavel? It's upstairs. Good morning, everybody. I missed you. I love you.
Committee will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on Europe's threat to American speech and innovation. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair is now recognized for an opening statement. And then we will move to our to the ranking member's opening statement, and then our witnesses will get 5 minutes. I want to just take an opportunity, maybe before I even do my opening statement, to welcome everyone back. Hope everyone had a good break. The ranking member and I, along with a few other members, Mr. Kiley, Mr. Fitzgerald, Mr. Correa, I think Mr. Swalwell and Ms. Crockett all had a wonderful visit to, and Mr. Cohen, to Europe, where we talked about this issue, and we learned some valuable information. And so we look forward to today's hearing and hearing from our witnesses. But first, you got to listen to the chairman and the ranking member talk. On August 12th of last year, Thierry Breton wrote Elon Musk a letter. Thierry Breton's the commissioner in charge of enforcement of the Digital Services Act and the Digital Marketing Act. In the very first sentence, the guy in charge of enforcing this legislation passed by the EU writes this: "Dear Mr. Musk, I am writing to you in the context of recent events in the United Kingdom and in relation to the planned broadcast on your platform, X, of a live conversation between a U.S. presidential candidate and yourself." So think about it. The guy in Europe in charge of enforcing a European Union law writes an American about an American company, about an American election, and he says the context for the letter, the reason for the letter, are events that are happening in the UK, a non-European Union country. That's not Europe trying to influence what happens here. I don't know what is. He goes on throughout the letter and says this: measures need to be taken to combat disinformation. He said this to Mr. Musk. We're concerned about any, quote, illegal content you may have. And he ends his letter by saying, "My services and I," very last sentence, "my services and I will be extremely vigilant to any evidence that points to breaches of the Digital Services Act and will not hesitate to make full use of our toolbox." So he ends the letter with a threat. So before the interview even takes place, he's threatening
I like him.
an American running an American company
Govern
about an
yourself
interview
accordingly.
regarding the most important election we have, election of the President of the United States. And again, saying the reason for doing so are events that are happening in a non-European Union country, the UK. Comments about events happening in the UK. Concerned about this, quote, spillover effect. That is why we're having today's hearing. That's why we went to Europe last month, or actually in July, to study this issue. Now, here's what's interesting. Mr. Breton, after he sends this letter, this committee sent him 2 letters, and then he suddenly resigns. We asked him to come today, but he refused to come. We asked him to send written testimony. He refused to do that. We asked him to appear. He just wouldn't come. I think it's important to remember what the House Judiciary Committee did last Congress. We investigated our government, the Biden administration, their attacks on free expression here in the United States. What Michael Schellenberger journalists called the censorship industrial complex. Big government, big tech, big media, big academia, all working together to censor Americans. And we learned all kinds of things in that investigation. We learned on April 27th of 2022 that the Biden administration had established a disinformation governance board. That's right, a bunch of bureaucrats going to get together and tell you what you can say, what you can tweet, what you can post, what you can read, what's misinformation, what's disinformation, and the new term they come up, what's malinformation. Thank goodness, because many of us raised concerns about that, they disbanded that disinformation governance board. We no longer had that. We heard from journalists like Mr. Schellenberger, like Matt Taibbi, regarding the Twitter files. We heard from Tulsi Gabbard. We heard from RFK Jr., all Democrats, frankly. In fact, I took some heat for that. What are you doing bringing Democrats in front of the judiciary? We brought them in because they care about the First Amendment. It was interesting. When RFK Jr. came in to testify, the Democrats actually made a motion to go to executive session.
They tried to censor him in the
Kick
censorship
everyone out.
hearing.
No journalists. No one was allowed. They wanted to kick everyone out, go to executive session so no one could hear what RFK Jr. was going to testify to in a hearing on censorship. You can't make this stuff up. We learned that on January 23rd. Think about that, by the way. We learned on January 23rd, 2021, maybe point this one out first, that there was an email. So the third day of the Biden administration, there was an email sent from the White House to Twitter which said, "Take down this tweet ASAP." And who had issued the tweet? Who had put out the tweet? RFK Jr. So you had the Biden administration trying to censor a fellow Democrat who was going to run against him in the Democrat primary. I mean, and everything in that tweet actually were true statements. So we learned all that last year, and of course our investigation culminated with a letter from Mr. Zuckerberg on August 26, 2024, last year, where he said, yes, the Biden administration pressured us to censor. We did it. We're sorry, and we won't do it again. And Meta, Facebook, has now subsequently changed policy. They now go to the community notes policy instead of the, quote, independent fact-checker approach that was being used before. We had one other witness last Congress, a journalist from Canada, Rupa Subramanya, who I thought said something that was really important. She said, free speech is a core value of Western culture. And that is true, and that's what our concern is. We're concerned about the attacks on free expression in Europe, the censorship, the arrest for offensive posts, the chilling effect it all has on speech, but we're more concerned, frankly, as Americans, about the limits the DSA, the Online Safety Act in the UK, put on Americans' First Amendment rights, and the shakedown, and I think that's the appropriate term, the shakedown of American tech companies under the DSA, the OSA, and the Digital Marketing Act Digital Markets Act in the European Union. These acts target our tech companies that provide the modern town square, and they are the engines of innovation in our global economy. Since the turn of the century, European tech companies have languished behind their American counterparts. European governments have tried everything to change this except what might actually work, deregulating their own economy and letting free enterprise flourish. Instead of cutting red tape and allowing their own companies to innovate and grow, the EU and the UK are going after American companies that have grown to dominate the global tech landscape. Regulations like the EU's Digital Markets Act and the UK's Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act impose burdensome requirements on US tech companies while leaving their European counterparts untouched. But these attacks on American companies won't result in a so-called European champion. Instead, China wins as Europe hurts both itself and America. They make the user experience worse. They distort the digital marketplace by allowing less innovative and less efficient foreign competitors to simply steal from U.S. tech companies. In addition to attacking American tech companies, Europe is attacking free speech around the world, including here in America. Laws like the Digital Services Act and the Online Safety Act are the engines of global censorship regime targeting political speech disfavored by European bureaucrats. The censorship mechanism is simple. The DSA and the OSA effectively require social media platforms to change their terms of service to moderate more content. These companies have one set of standards that they apply globally because it's costly, impractical, and harmful to user privacy to change content moderation rules based on a user's location. So when platforms are forced to change their terms of service to comply with European laws, it affects what we see, what we read, what we say online here in America, infringing on Americans' First Amendment rights. And this is no accident. Even the New York Times, The Atlantic have acknowledged that these foreign censorship laws are intended to have global impact. And European actions have proven it. Again, just look at Mr. Breton's letter. Supporters say these laws make the online environment safer for children, something that we all agree with. We all want to protect kids. But censorship laws are never about disinformation or child safety or anything else. They're always about censoring criticism of the government. Social media is a relatively new technology, but censorship is as old as time. Misinformation, disinformation, hate speech labels are always used by the people in power to censor their critics. And my experience has taught me that today's misinformation is tomorrow's truth. And we have seen it time and time again. I always like to point out, everything the government told us about COVID turned out to be wrong. Everything our government told us about COVID. I'm not even talking about Europe here. Everything. They told us that the virus didn't come from a lab. Sure looks like it did. They told us it wasn't gain-of-function research done at the lab. Yes, it was. They told us it wasn't our tax money used at the lab. Yes, it was. They told us vaccines. They told us that the vaccinated can't get it. They told us the vaccinated can't transmit it. They told us masks work. They told us 6 feet social distance was based on science. And they told us this was the first virus in history where there's no such thing as natural immunity. They were 0 for 8. And yet they're going to define with some disinformation governance board what we can say, what we can tweet, what we can read, what we can post. You got to be kidding me. As RFK Jr. testified before our committee, never forgot what he said. He said, when you look at history, When you look at history, it is never the good guys who are for censorship. It is always the bad guys, and that's our concern. We need debate. The best way to answer bad speech, wrong speech, stupid speech, crazy speech, even hate speech, is more speech. We need the First Amendment. Our committee will continue to move legislation that protects free speech from threats, including threats from abroad. And with that, I now recognize our ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses. I imagine that in a hearing about threats to freedom of speech abroad, we might hear from a Russian dissident about Putin's massive violations of political freedom, or the death of Alexei Navalny in prison, or perhaps a Chinese pro-democracy activist about President Xi's attacks on free speech in Hong Kong, Tibet, Xinjiang, or the persecution trial of Jimmy Lai, or maybe a journalist about the Saudi Crown Prince's assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post writer who demanded freedom from religious persecution and oppression in Saudi Arabia. But no, the dictators of the world have got nothing to fear from this hearing. The Republicans called it to attack our democratic allies in Europe. The star witness is not a human rights leader like Navalny, but a far-right, pro-Putin politician who leads the UK Reform Party, a party that has 4 members out of 650 members in the parliament. He calls England an authoritarian regime, while saying that Vladimir Putin is the world leader he admires the most. Well, this hearing mimics Vice President J.D. Vance, who went to the Munich Security Conference in February. In the first 2 minutes of his speech, whitewashed the world's leading autocratic regimes, proclaiming that the threat that worries him is not Russia. It's not China, he said, but rather it's our European allies. Amazing. Republicans are promoting far-right parties in Europe, like Alternative for Deutschland, Reform UK, and Rassemblement National Français, and ignoring massive repression in Russia, China, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and among all the autocrats of the world. Republicans are vilifying European liberal democracies simply for engaging in the kind of line-drawing exercises that we Americans engage in under our First Amendment with respect to the epidemic of child pornography, protecting children from other harmful content, defamatory speech, online scams and false advertising, and speech inciting riots and imminent lawless action. All forms of speech that the First Amendment does not protect and whose tricky contours must still be drawn by law. We could have a meaningful hearing on this complicated subject, but this hearing is just a drive-by hit against a strong Democratic ally to benefit a Donald Trump sycophant and wannabe. But it's even worse than this. Not only are our colleagues ignoring intensifying repression in the world's dictatorships, they're also trying to distract the world from the attack on freedom taking place right here in America every single day. Americans aren't worried about the EU or the Online Safety Act in the UK. We're not worried about white nationalists not having enough license to incite lynch mobs to set immigrants on fire in their bedrooms. Americans are worried that Donald Trump is working to rewrite and whitewash American history in our museums, our textbooks, and our national parks, to destroy PBS, NPR, and public broadcasting, to ban books in our libraries, and to censor any news stories critical of him by installing political henchmen in private broadcast rooms. Americans know that academic freedom is in danger when the administration cancels and withholds billions of dollars in scientific and medical research funding from American universities, even for urgent life-saving studies about breast cancer or heart attacks, as a way to force schools to impose government orthodoxy on curriculum, hiring, admissions, and any student and faculty speech that MAGA considers politically incorrect. Americans see Trump trying to harass, intimidate, control, and shut down the press, like ABC, CBS, NBC, NPR, and PBS. The Republican-controlled FCC essentially blackmailed media companies Skydance and Paramount into agreeing to install a spy, a monitor, a minder, I think the Brits might say, to police CBS news programs to make sure that they are being sufficiently Trumpy in giving us the news in order to get approval of a merger from FCC. Meanwhile, Trump sued 60 Minutes
and CBS personally for $20 billion for the frivolous cause of action that he thought an interview with Kamala Harris was edited too favorably, and then walked away with a cool $16 million in a shakedown settlement for his library, all part of a now familiar pattern. When Trump doesn't like the news, he sues the broadcaster and unleashes the FCC on them until they pay up and agree to a government spy stationed in their office. Free speech is so much in danger in the US today that if the government tries to violate our rights, we might not even be able to find a lawyer to defend ourselves because Trump is systematically exacting retribution against law firms that represent anyone on the other side of a case against him. Look, our country loves free speech. We fight for free speech. We fought for free speech, and we know it's in danger when students who are lawfully in the United States are taken off the street and arrested without warrants by masked federal agents in unmarked cars for writing an article or attending a rally that Stephen Miller doesn't like. Free speech is in danger when visitors to our country have their social media accounts screened at the border for any criticism of Donald Trump. Free speech is in danger when To Kill a Mockingbird, The Handmaid's Tale, 1984, and The Kite Runner are banned from our schools and libraries across the country, and even families defending our freedom abroad have to fight for their kids' right to read freely in public schools run by the Department of Defense. Freedom's in danger when the administration tramples the civil service rights of hundreds of thousands of nonpartisan expert civil servants. These civil servants have been protected against political discrimination for more than a century to maintain the excellence and independence of our federal workforce, but they're now being fired simply for doing their jobs, like prosecuting violent criminals and insurrectionists who try to overthrow our government and attack our police officers, or because they honestly gave honest economic information and labor statistics to the public. These honorable civil servants are being fired because they won't be the political hacks Trump demands that they be. When private comments made by federal employees are scrutinized for anti-Trump bias and they can lose their jobs because of it, then we've entered the realm not just of Vladimir Putin, but of Joseph Stalin. Now, Mr. Trump and Mr. Farage both claim they're protectors of free speech, but they only want to protect speech they agree with. In the UK, Mr. Farage is openly promoting the abolition of the Human Rights Act of 1998 to be replaced with a British Bill of Rights that limits the right of free speech to British citizens and legally sanctioned residents. He complains that racist threats against immigrants are not protected free speech, while he proposes to strip migrants, tourists, and perhaps even visiting American congresspeople of any free speech rights at all. I had my own close encounter with that when Mr. Farage and his team presented for more than an hour in a conversation we had about free speech. And after 3 minutes of talking, he cut me off and terminated the meeting because he didn't like what I was saying. That's the kind of free speech he's committed to. There is a free speech crisis in America today, but there's no free speech crisis in Britain. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has not shut down GB News, where Mr. Farage has his own show, just because Mr. Farage has used his airtime to call for banning peaceful protests that he disagrees with. No one has stopped him from going on Russian TV 17 times and saying also and repeating that the one world political leader he most admired was Vladimir Putin, even though Vladimir Putin is a war criminal and a dictator who has regularly interfered in other countries' democratic elections. No one has stopped Mr. Farage from parroting Putin's absurd talking points, like when Farage claimed that NATO, the US, and Britain provoked this war in Ukraine. For a man who fashions himself as some kind of a free speech martyr, Mr. Farage seems most at home with the autocrats and dictators of the world who are crushing freedom on earth. Mr. Farage wants to get rid of the Online Safety Act in his country, a law shepherded by the Conservative Party and implemented by the Labor Party, which bans child pornography online, protects children from harmful content, forbids non-consensual pornography and other unlawful content. He should go and advance the positions he's taking here in Congress today in Parliament, which is meeting today. if he's serious about it. To the people of UK who think this Putin-loving free speech imposter and Trump sycophant will protect freedom in your country, come on over to America and see what Trump and MAGA are doing to destroy our freedom, kidnap college students off the street, ban books from our libraries, militarize our police and unleash them against our communities, take over our universities, wreck our professional civil service, and turn the government into a money-making machine for Trump and his family. You might think twice before you let Mr. Farage make Britain great again. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I would just point out that the encounter that the ranking member had with Mr. Farage was a little different at my recollection than how it was described. And I would also point out that the gentleman alleges there's no free speech in America under President Trump, while his staff member is holding up countless number of articles criticizing the Trump administration. I think that's a little bit of a, well, let's say that's not how I think it actually goes. So we now will introduce today's witnesses. We will start with the Right Honourable Nigel Farage. Mr. Farage is a member of Parliament from Clacton and the leader of the Reform UK Party. He is also a television host and was a leading proponent of the Brexit campaign. Mr. Lorcán Price is an attorney with ADF International, a nonprofit organization that works to protect religious freedom, free speech, parental rights, and the sanctity of life. Before joining ADF International, he was an attorney in Ireland. Mr. Morgan Reed is the president of the App Association, a trade association comprised of app developers and connected device manufacturers. He routinely testifies before Congress on matters of interest to his members, including artificial intelligence, competition, and other issues. And we have Professor David Kaye. Mr. Kaye is a clinical professor of law at the UC Irvine School of Law. Professor Kaye previously served as the United States Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression. We welcome our witnesses and thank them for appearing today. We will begin by swearing you in. Would you all please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show that each of the witnesses answered in the affirmative. You can, thank you, please be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. I think we'll just go down the line, and we will start with Mr. Reed, then Mr. Price, Mr. Farage, and then Professor Kaye. So, Mr. Reed, you're recognized. 5 minutes.
My name is Morgan Reed, and I'm the president of ACT, the App Association. Our members are small and medium-sized tech companies from your districts and around the world. We build and sell the apps and the products you love. If you're scheduling a haircut, tracking your productivity at work, or using online tools to train your employees, it's likely one of my members made that happen. I'm here to tell you that our European members are just as good, just as smart, and just as entrepreneurial as our American members. Whether it's Clement Sauvage in France, Mitchell Volkring in the Netherlands, or Mark Thomas in the UK, their companies are busy trying to change the world. The difference between them and our American members can be seen in the ever-growing wall of ex-ante regulation and compliance requirements from an EU government that is constantly asking how government can be more involved rather than less. Unfortunately, the DMA is a perfect encapsulation of the problem. Ostensibly, it exists to make it easier for EU companies to compete with the US tech lead. Instead, it just creates leadership in red tape. Small companies find value in the bigger platforms for 3 boring and absolutely vital reasons. They need to offload overhead, have access to a global market, and have customer trust. Because small businesses are always overworked and undermanned. For us, offloading overhead is critical. A small business is trying to ship a product, not learn about tax laws in 160 countries. We don't want to sign multiple contracts with middlemen to handle shipping or web storage, or send bills to dozens of different platforms, each with their own PO system. Small businesses need to focus their time on serving the customer to compete. And of course, to grow your small business, you need customers. And that means access to a global market. If your product has fewer than 100 customers in your state, that's a hobby. But 100,000 customers worldwide, that's a business. Nearly every one of the DMA's designated gatekeepers are actually gateways to a global market. But you might say, Morgan, the internet itself is a global market. And we would agree, but the internet lacks one key characteristic: trust. Today, many of us take for granted the measures of keeping malware and other harmful content off of our devices and off of our shopping sites. But DMA threatens to change this by forcing companies to roll out the red carpet for bad actors. As a result, consumers will rationally steer away from startups and small developers they've never heard of and towards larger, more established rivals that spend millions on marketing and buy Super Bowl ads to build their brand. Don't forget who's pushing the DMA. It's companies like Spotify, Yelp, DuckDuckGo, companies you've heard of. And just in case you think I'm exaggerating, the first business to take advantage of the DMA's requirements wasn't some brilliant startup being kept down by big tech. It was an app called Hot Tub, a porn aggregator that can now be sideloaded and could even operate without parental controls. This is the most damaging aspect of the DMA. By forcing the gatekeepers to remove features or capabilities that would keep bad actors off your smartphone and out of your wallet, the DMA demands the world adopt a flea market model, where anybody with a plastic folding table and some boxes that fell off the back of the truck are given the same access to consumers as legitimate businesses. For small businesses, we want the platforms to provide us with ever-improving tools, features, and pricing models to make it attractive. We don't love the big platforms, we do business with them. Because without our products, their platforms aren't worth very much. Without their tools, our overhead goes up, our speed goes down, and trust goes out the window. If we have any ask of the platforms, it's for them to do more, not less. We want them to do more to reduce overhead, more to protect our intellectual property, and do more to maintain those trust relationships. And into this relatively straightforward business arrangement, Europe has injected regulatory walls like the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, the Online Safety Act, our old friend GDPR, and the newest edition, the AI Act. These laws aren't there to lower friction. They are, as Teresa Ribera at the European Commission puts it, focused on creating a culture of compliance. That's a quote. While an ever-thickening wall of overlapping regulations is exactly what compliance lawyers want, it's not what innovators want. It's not what small businesses want, and it's not what customers want. We ask you to reject the European regulatory culture and instead focus on a culture of opportunity and innovation. Small businesses never succeed if we can't beat the red tape. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Mr. Price, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Raskin, distinguished members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lorcán Price. I am a barrister and legal counsel for ADF International, and I'm very happy to come here today to speak to you about the perilous situation for freedom of expression in Europe and why it matters for Americans. I do this on the basis of my experience litigating in speech and religious liberty cases before the European Court of Human Rights. However, today, principally, I wish to address the Digital Services Act of the European Union. But before I do that, I'd like to set the scene briefly by telling you how bad things have become in Europe and the United Kingdom, and very much building on the remarks of the chairman. Because when I met some of the members of the committee in Europe recently, I think that there was a genuine element of surprise and disbelief about the state of affairs in Europe. I'll give you some examples. In Finland, our client, Päivi Räsänen, a member of parliament, is now in year 5 of a prosecution for simply posting a verse from scripture on Twitter. Our client, Rose Doherty in Scotland, a 74-year-old grandmother, was arrested by offering to have consensual conversations for people. Adam Smith-Connor, an army veteran, was prosecuted for praying silently in his head in England. And just yesterday, you'll have seen that the UK police arrested a comedian and fellow Irishman, Graham Linehan, a person I know well, for tweets about gender ideology. German pensioners are having their homes raided and are being prosecuted for insulting politicians. Indeed, one member of the Green Party in Germany has over 700 criminal complaints outstanding for insult. What's happening in Europe is, as Vice President Vance said on St. Valentine's Day in Munich, a serious retreat from a fundamental value, that of free speech. It's a sign that our European political elite has lost control of the narrative, and the Digital Services Act is the response to that, an increasingly desperate attempt to suppress growing public discontent. Why should this matter for Americans? Why should you be concerned? Because of the worldwide reach of European law, the so-called Brussels effect changes regulation in every area that the European Union chooses to regulate. And now they've entered the business of regulating speech. And they're very proud of the so-called Brussels effect when you ask them about it. This new EU law is essentially an anti-speech law. And when you read the case law of the European Court of Justice, statements from senior officials, and the provisions of the Digital Services Act, you can see everything is there to create a digital censorship industrial complex. We see a whole structure of trusted flaggers, codes of conduct, on so-called hate speech and misinformation, content moderation for so-called systemic risks. Much of this is hidden in bland technocratic language in the DSA, and our written submissions go into some of the problems associated with it. But it constitutes nothing more than an attempt to bring Brussels regulation of speech onto a global stage. Furthermore, when the European Union is now negotiating trade deals, including with your neighbours to the north and Canada, they insist that the Digital Services Act is part of that. So it's very clearly a global intent. It means that the European Union will set the global standard when it comes to speech. And because of the laws that I just outlined in Europe, the type of prosecutions we're seeing, it's an extremely low standard. It draws, I would suggest to you, a digital curtain where once there was an iron curtain. And US companies bear the brunt disproportionately of this. They're hijacked by the DSA to become essentially the EU's global censorship police, whether they like it or not. The DSA contains expansive powers of investigation, huge compliance costs, and crippling fines if they're found to be non-compliant for removing so-called illegal content. Indeed, I commend your committee's report recently on showing the bias at the heart of the system. As we speak, companies are having to make a decision, an invidious decision between whether or not they defend German pensioners criticizing politicians or they comply with the European Commission and with national laws. We know from COVID censorship which is the most likely route they take. Compliance is easier and cheaper, but it is not good for speech. Indeed, yesterday I was just informed by a senior lawyer for a major US company that the Germans are prosecuting a 14-year-old boy for a mild online post. They want the identity of another post outside Germany, and they've launched criminal proceedings against US employees of this company for refusing to pass over the identity information. That's the attitude we're dealing with. We've seen it from Thierry Breton, from others in the European Commission. They want this censorship power and they want it globally. The digital square is one of the great gifts from the United States to the world. It has been transformative for our political discussion. But the EU wants to make itself the sheriff of the square, and it's armed itself with powerful tools. And there are more to come, unfortunately, including the Democracy Shield. I agree with Ranking Member Raskin that it is sad when close allies and democracies do this kind of thing, and we must call them out for it. We must take a stand against this new censorship wave. Democracy requires free speech. I'm looking forward to our discussion and any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Price. The Right Honourable Member of Parliament, Mr. Farage, is recognized.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chairman Jordan, for inviting me here today. And it turns out, with news in the last 48 hours, to have been really rather timely. I'm delighted to reacquaint with the charming Mr. Raskin. It was delightful testimony you gave me earlier on with your speech. But hey, that's fine. You can say what you like. I don't care. Because that's what free speech is. And in a sense, this has all been going wrong now for a couple of decades. We've kind of forgotten the Voltairean principles that we'll fight and defend to the death your right to say something that we fundamentally disagree with. That is the absolute foundation, if you think about it, of free speech, of democracy, of living in freedom. It's kind of why we fought 2 world wars at massive, massive cost to defend that very principle for ourselves and for many, many others around the country. And I first became worried about all this with cancel culture. You know, the idea that we can't have this speaker go to a university because some people might be offended by what he or she have to say. It is important to note that there is not a parent in the United Kingdom, and I would guess it's the same for America too, that is not concerned about content their children as minors can find on the internet. Not a single parent that is not concerned about this. But at the moment, we're not finding the right solutions. I do myself begin to think that hardware might be one of the solutions. That laptops, that handsets could be programmed so that many, many apps and many, many services simply aren't available from these devices. But what we've done is to go down the legislative route. And it's extraordinary that, you know, I come from the land of Magna Carta. I come from the land that gave us the mother of parliaments. And it doesn't give me any great joy to be sitting in America and describing the really awful authoritarian situation that we have now sunk into. J.D. Vance did us all a service at the Munich Security Conference back in February this year. He really got this debate up and running, and it's a vital one. We've run on since then The Online Safety Act was put in place by the last Conservative government. I don't doubt for a minute they're good intentions, but sometimes the road to hell is paved with those good intentions. And we are now where we are. We have a couple of very famous cases. We, of course, have Lucy Connolly, who put out an intemperate tweet after the savage murder of those 3 beautiful young girls, she herself, a mother who had lost a child. It was intemperate, it was wrong, but she removed it 3.5 hours later, sentenced to 31 months in prison. She's now out, having served 40% of the time. I wanted to bring her with me today as living proof of what can go wrong. Sadly, the restrictions that have been put on her banned her from making the trip, which is a very, very great shame. And we, of course, have the extraordinary events that we understood yesterday of Graham Linehan, the comedic writer, and he put out some tweets months ago when he was in Arizona, and months later he arrives at Heathrow Airport to be met by 5 armed police. Armed police, not a big deal in the USA, a very big deal in the United Kingdom. 5 of them. And he was arrested and taken away for questioning. He's not even a British citizen. He's an Irish citizen. This could happen to any American man or woman that goes to Heathrow that has said things online that the British government and British police don't like. It is a potentially big threat to tech bosses, to many, many others. This legislation we've got will damage trade between our countries, threaten free speech across the West because of the knock-on rollout effects of this legislation from us or from the European Union. So I've come today as well to be a klaxon, to say to you, don't allow, piece by piece, this to happen here in America. And you would be doing us and yourselves and all freedom-loving people a favor if your politicians and your businesses said to the British government, you've simply got this wrong. At what point did we become North Korea? Well, I think the Irish comedy writer found that out 2 days ago at Heathrow Airport. This is a genuinely worrying, concerning, and shocking situation, and I thank you for the opportunity to come here today.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Well said. Thank you, Mr. Farage. Professor Kaye, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Raskin, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear before you. I ask that my written statement be entered into the record. My name is David Kaye. I'm a law professor at the University of California, Irvine, where I research and teach in international law. I know something about censorship. From 2014 to 2020, I was the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression. In that role, I monitored a growing global assault on free speech. Among other things, I led a landmark effort to call out China's attacks on civil society. I detailed repression of media and criticism in Putin's Russia. I condemned Iran's suppression of dissent. And I even criticized democratic governments when they sought to force platforms to take down lawful speech. That is censorship. Violations of the human right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, guaranteed by Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, a treaty ratified by the United States in 1992. Inspired by the First Amendment, it guarantees a speaker's rights and the rights of everyone to access information. So it pains me that the United States, the country that had my back as Special Rapporteur, the land of the First Amendment's make no law, now leads the charge to undermine freedom of speech and of the press. The threat is real, live, and I think shocking given our nation's historic commitments. The administration follows a well-worn path. A few examples. The silencing of scientists and public health officials. Just last week, the head of the CDC was fired because she would not agree to change her conclusions about vaccines. The administration has scrubbed websites that doctors and parents use to make decisions. Censoring and punishing speech of visitors. In visa interviews and at the border, there are increasing reports of officers screening visitors according to their social media activity or detaining and deporting based on speech and op-eds. And the repeated assaults on the media, as we've seen attacks on public broadcasting, frivolous lawsuits against media outlets, and the decimation of Voice of America. This is the tip of an iceberg of censorship that should concern this committee and every American. Yet US officials who claim to be free speech warriors are spending their time looking abroad. Now, I know of nobody who argues that EU and British laws on speech are perfect. Still, the EU Digital Services Act and the UK Online Safety Act respond to problems both sides of the aisle in Congress have found serious but have yet to address: the enormous, opaque, and unaccountable power of a small number of massive tech companies over our information environments. The EU answered the question of massive platform power not by claiming new powers to take down content or accounts. It adopted new rules to empower users, including by requiring notice and an opportunity to appeal content moderation decisions. The Online Safety Act, championed by Labor and conservative parties, was widely popular as an attempt to hold big tech accountable. It does have elements that concern me, yet whatever faults it might have, it, like any other British law, is subject to legal challenge and review by courts for any violation of fundamental rights, just as we would expect of any democracy. Neither established censorship regimes. I encourage members of this committee to consider two things. First, instead of criticizing allied democracies, consider the kinds of content online that you find objectionable. Maybe it's anti-Semitic or Islamophobic content, misogyny, child endangerment, content glorifying terrorism or inciting violence. How do you propose to address those in a way that is consistent with free speech values? That's not an easy question, and it can't be waved away with just 3 words: because free speech. The EU and the UK have made their choices subject to democratic judicial oversight, and acting in good faith, I think this committee could do the same. Second, this committee has the obligation to protect Americans' freedom of expression here at home. The administration is putting freedom of expression under direct attack, and I think oversight and constraint from this committee would make quite a bit of sense. That, I would respectfully submit, is the real threat to American speech and innovation, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. The chair, we'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. Well, one of the things we found out on our trip through Europe was that the U.S. innovates, China duplicates, and now the EU regulates. Mr. Reid, I have a question for you first. Reports estimate that complying with the EU's Digital Markets Act, the DMA, could cost American companies up to $1 billion every single year. That's not just a number on a page. Those costs ultimately fall on American workers, who will see fewer jobs, on consumers, who will face higher prices and fewer choices, and on entrepreneurs, who will have a harder time competing against subsidized foreign rivals. Mr. Reid, is it correct that these compliance costs affect our economy? And what does it mean for America if Europe is allowed to impose these kind of costs on U.S. innovation?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. The more detailed answer is that, unfortunately, that Europe has taken an ex-ante approach to regulation. The United States has always done well with an ex post. As a small business entrepreneur, I actually want fraud to be gone after. I want deceptive practices to be reduced. But unfortunately, what we see in the EU is an ex-ante process that ups my compliance requirements without actually giving customers the certainty of the result. So it's absolutely raising costs, and for American developers, we see one of the largest problems is how do you get to those European customers if the first tranche you hit is paying a compliance lawyer to meet all of these tests?
Thank you. Mr. Price, our Federal Trade Commission Chairman Ferguson has warned that government regulation can stifle, obviously, competition and innovation, and in many cases, the government itself becomes the most dangerous of all the monopolies. Isn't it the DMA, is the DMA a perfect example of that? It kind of weaponizes and makes it burdensome with regulations. Can you give me your comments on the DMA and what do you think the status is right now?
I certainly agree that European regulation generally slows down competition. It creates a situation whereby companies are unable to innovate with any degree of speed because they're constantly looking over their shoulder towards regulators around compliance. DMA, a very good example of that. Not just the DMA, though. Of course, you have the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. You have the DSA, the Digital Services Act, and constantly more and more being added. It's been estimated in the digital market space alone since 2016. 30 pages of regulation existed at the time. We're now over 1,000 and growing. So the European Union's response to American innovation is more and more regulation, generally around nebulous concepts like safetyism and protecting consumers, but very often just, particularly with the DSA, to create, unfortunately, a censorship industrial complex, as I outlined. DMA, very good example of that as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reid, if I could come back to you, President Trump just secured a landmark commitment from the EU to address unjustified digital trade barriers. It was part of the U.S.-EU trade deal. I'm hopeful that this will result in the EU kind of removing, and a lot of people we talked to in Europe when we were there said that there was a possibility that they could pull back on some of this. What action could President Trump take to hold the EU accountable to their commitment? And are there additional enforcement tools that Congress could provide to make that happen?
Well, I think, Congressman Fitzgerald, you've done great work in reaching out and sending letters to make it clear what the position of the United States government is on these issues. The reality is that the Europeans themselves, through the Draghi report, are recognizing that they have done a lot to harm those very same industries. We're hopeful that the United States can continue to use the careful power and the careful discussions through our trade negotiations and other actions to get them to step back. But we're here to talk about free speech, and so one of the things I would point out is we want the small businesses in Europe to also be able to speak and say, hey, we need these regulations pulled back.
So just to follow up to that then as well, a 2024 staff report by the Housing Oversight Committee found that FTC Chair Lorcán was using taxpayer dollars to send agency quote-unquote liaisons to the EU to assist with the implementation of the Digital Markets Act. Mr. Reid, do you think it's appropriate for that type of consultation or for the use of taxpayer dollars to help a foreign country implement laws that unfairly discriminate against U.S. companies?
Well, we don't think taxpayer dollars should ever be used to unfairly discriminate against United States companies. We're hopeful that U.S. taxpayer dollars can be used to ensure open markets around the world and a safe environment for our entrepreneurs to succeed.
Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the subcommittee, or ranking member of the subcommittee, gentleman who made a big announcement this week. We're sorry to hear about, but we appreciate your service, and you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, there is a clear and present danger to free speech in America, but it is not across the Atlantic Ocean. It is right here in Washington, sitting in the Oval Office. At a time when the greatest threat to the First Amendment rights of Americans resides in the White House, our Republican colleagues have brought us here today to talk about Europe. They've invited a fringe politician from the United Kingdom to attack the laws regulating certain conduct online in his country and the European Union, laws that are intended to combat disinformation by hostile foreign actors, hate speech, and other fraudulent or criminal conduct. They have sounded the alarms about these foreign laws, but when it comes to the Trump administration's suppression of speech in this country, Republicans are curiously and dangerously silent. There is virtually no corner of society that Donald Trump and his administration have left untouched by their effort to impose their radical views on the American people and to stamp out dissent. Since taking office, President Trump and members of his administration have used the powers of the executive branch in an attempt to silence their political opponents by attacking our core democratic institutions, such as academia, the legal profession, and journalism. These are moves straight out of the authoritarian playbook. For example, the Trump administration has taken aim at colleges and universities, trying to bend them to its will by withholding billions of dollars in scientific research funding, a short-sighted move that will set back innovation in this country by decades. and in some cases, including at my alma mater of Columbia, it has demanded onerous conditions that infringe on academic freedom. On these same college campuses, students are being kidnapped for writing op-eds, and others are being deported for participating in protests. The Trump administration has also targeted disfavored law firms that dare to challenge the president or to hold him accountable, or simply for hiring an attorney who clashed with Trump in the past. Some have sadly capitulated to its campaign of extortion. The president has even taken aim at the arts and humanities, launching a hostile takeover of the Kennedy Center and censoring exhibits at the Smithsonian Institution, attempting to whitewash American history and to stamp out free expression. He has also engaged in a dangerous campaign of harassment and intimidation of the media. For example, last October, he sued CBS for $10 billion for editing a 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris in a way he didn't like. Although this suit was widely ridiculed by First Amendment attorneys who called it meritless and absurd, Paramount, the parent company of CBS News, was desperate to win approval from the Trump-controlled FCC for its proposed multi-billion-dollar merger and felt pressure to settle this baseless lawsuit. Ultimately, it paid $16 million to settle the suit, and just days later, the FCC approved the merger. What a coincidence. This followed ABC's settlement of a similarly baseless Trump lawsuit for $15 million because of corporate pressure. And now the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch face their own $10 billion lawsuit from Donald Trump over the Journal's reporting that shed new light on Trump's well-documented relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not aware of any president in the past suing media companies or newspapers or television stations for free expression they didn't like. Professor Kaye, the free press is essential to our democracy and the rule of law. Can you explain how President Trump's attacks on the news media and his attempts to sue them into silence impact freedom of expression and freedom of speech in this country?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Nadler, and congratulations on your announcement this week. Well, I think it's important to note that when we're talking about attacks on the press, it's not just about attacks on the journalists themselves or the media outlets themselves. It's about every American's right of access to information. It's about the freedom of public debate that we get from a media that isn't intimidated either by suit or by criticism from the Oval Office or whatever it might be. And so I think it's really important to think about these kinds of attacks, not only as those on journalists, but on the entire information ecosystem. And I think it's also important for us to realize that we can't pick and choose what censorship we like and don't like. I think the chairman's statement was really correct when he said censorship used by people in power to censor critics, that's at the core. And we should be examining where do we see that. We tend to see that quite a bit in this country, I think in an unprecedented way.
In your testimony, you identified a number of threats to freedom of expression in the United States, including science and public health. It's also been reported that the government has a list of hundreds of words, ranging from issues related to climate change to diversity, equity, and inclusion, that it essentially is banned from government websites and uses to make funding decisions. Is this true?
I've seen those reports, and I understand that to be true as well, particularly the use of lists of words, essentially to censor research that would be conducted by scientists at universities and at national academies in the United States.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ranking member is recognized for unanimous consent. Understand?
Yes.
Gentleman's
Thank you, Mr.
recognized.
Chairman. This is a minority fact sheet about the majority's report on the Digital Services Act.
Well, we'll look forward to reading that. Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I have another.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for unanimous consent.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article published by Reuters on October 29th, 2024, titled Fact Check, UK Woman Jailed for Inciting Racial Hatred, Not Posting Hurtful Words, which confirms that Lucy Connolly pled guilty to inciting racial hatred and was not, as claimed in deceptive social media posts, punished merely for posting, quote, edgy words on the internet.
Without objection. I'm sure we'll
Thank
be
you, Mr.
some
Chairman.
comments about that later. And the gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Kaye, being a fellow Californian, I'm sure you're aware and could correct the ranking member that our own governor has sued Fox for $787 million. Isn't that correct?
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, I didn't think you would be, but neither was the ranking member, apparently. MP Farage, do you have the equivalent of what the Professor Kay was talking about, which is the Article 19? You're a signatory to that international convention, if you will, on free speech. Do you feel that it is being observed in the UK?
Maybe a signatory to it, and we may. And the Prime Minister, today in the House of Commons was talking about free speech, and indeed when President Trump was with him in Scotland the other day, he talked about our proud history of free speech, but what people say and what they do are two very different things. And the argument is that the Online Safety Act, I'll repeat what I said earlier, may have been designed by the Tories with the best of intentions, but has turned out to be the sledgehammer that misses the nut. It's not protecting kids, and it is damaging.
So now, going back to the United States, you don't have a constitutional framework that is the equivalent of ours in that you have no First Amendment absolute guarantee. Is that correct?
It is correct. Our Constitution isn't in written form. It's based on common law that's evolved and adapted over centuries, and your founding fathers looked at the best bits that we had.
So it appears in Europe and in the UK, free speech is whatever the bloody members think it is at a given time, and it changes with the will of the people they elect. Is that right?
Yes, but I don't think at any point we've really had a proper debate about infringement of free speech until COVID. And I think COVID changed the game.
Okay.
I think the government, social media platforms, big media, suddenly there were arguments that needed to be made that were banned.
So, Mr. Reed, to your knowledge, and I would go to the professor, but he seems to be ill-informed even on our own governor's lawsuits. First Amendment. In the United States, you can sue for anything. Do you often win if you sue against institutions like Fox, Wall Street Journal? Isn't it true that effectively the First Amendment creates a tremendous shield against anything except malicious, deliberate lies?
Not my area of expertise. We can absolutely talk about apps, but as an American, yes, that is absolutely my understanding.
And you have no such protection, just the opposite. You have no idea in Europe or in Britain about what is going to be allowed or not allowed. In other words, you don't know where to call balls and strikes. You just simply have to pay the fines when you get to them.
Well, I only carry one passport, so I'm more aware of the American laws, but that is my understanding correct.
Okay, now, we do have a First Amendment, and we are a signatory to Article 19. So I'm going to go a little bit into opinion. Now, I'm the author of No Censorship on Our Shores, meaning, Mr. Price, I know you're familiar with it, I'm not going to tolerate censorship overseas and then have those people come to the United States. Now, Professor Kay may object to the idea that I'm not going to let people who have been involved in censorship come into the United States because I think it's unacceptable to get away with that overseas. But let's be reciprocal for a moment for Mr. Reed and for everyone. If we're seeing Europe and the UK and other countries stifle what we are guaranteed in the U.S., and particularly arrest somebody for what they said while on U.S. soils, shouldn't this administration be just as strong and reciprocal that we will not tolerate that activity even off our shores? And isn't that ultimately what the United States must make available to the world, essentially guarantee the First Amendment to anyone, anywhere, if they want to do business with the United States? Mr. Price.
The leadership of the United States on this issue has been transformative for the discussion in Europe. And from the President, Secretary Rubio, and the Vice President, they have transformed the issue, and I hope more comes.
So, to the fringe parliamentarian, as you were called, and probably the future Prime Minister, what say you?
Yes, for Mr. Nadler's benefit, it's a very big fringe, and we're doing rather well, but there we are. Look, you know, if you were to follow, Mr. Isaac, the logic of your argument that you were to ban people from entering America who would pass legislation that was prejudicial against American companies or American citizens and would threaten them with potential arrest if they came across the other side of the pond, I think the practical difficulty with that is you'd have to ban the British government, the entire Labour Party. So I'm not sure in practical terms that it works, but I understand the sentiment.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me be clear. I am not here to defend the European laws, and I've often criticized the approach of European countries to internet-related issues. It's really generally wrong-headed. But I don't really think that's the point of this hearing. I think the real threat to the First Amendment isn't coming from Europe. It's coming from Republican-led states that have introduced bills to close the open internet, and most of all, from Donald Trump, who's actively trampling free speech here at home. I think it's rather absurd for this committee to spend our time criticizing laws we have no jurisdiction over while ignoring the countless ways the Trump administration is tearing up the First Amendment. If this committee is really serious about protecting free speech, we need to focus on the Trump administration's literal assault on the First Amendment that's happening right here at home. So, Professor Kaye, I have a series of questions for you. Do you think that arresting international students for being critical of U.S. foreign policy is an attack on the First Amendment?
Yes, absolutely.
And isn't that because it's not just the right of the person to speak, but the right of all the rest of us to hear? The First Amendment isn't just about the speaker, it's also about the listener. Isn't that correct?
Right, that's true.
Now, a federal judge agreed with you and with us, warning that arresting students for their views chills the speech of millions of Americans. The government can't punish speech simply because they don't like its content. This year, as has been mentioned by others, President Trump's FCC blocked the CBS merger until the network agreed to change its programming and install a so-called bias monitor. The head of 60 Minutes resigned, saying he could no longer make independent decisions about the news. Doesn't that sound like a violation of the First Amendment's guarantee of a free press?
It does, and I think it's important to underline that restrictions on free speech don't come just from a law or the police outside your door. It can come from a whole network of intimidation, of public attack that really does chill speech, including the kinds of attacks that lead to deportations of people who are here just to study.
Since January, the Trump administration has revoked over 6,000 student visas because the speech of these students didn't align with what Trump agreed with. And now they're doing the same to immigrants who are applying for citizenship. Does that raise First Amendment concerns, do you think?
I think it raises First Amendment concerns, but it's also in a broader way, it's raising concerns about our tolerance of dissent, of this government's tolerance of criticism. And not everything is specifically about the First Amendment and the ability to enforce it in our courts. Sometimes it's about leaders in our country actually promoting a culture of open debate and open access to information. The very things that we've heard a lot about already this morning, a kind of marketplace of ideas that some people still talk about, that's not just about what the law provides, that's also about how our leaders behave towards that kind of open debate.
The Federal Trade Commission held up a merger of two major advertising firms, Omnicom and Interpublic, until they agreed to run ads on X, essentially a government-ordered gift to Elon Musk. Isn't that a blatant violation of free speech standards, forcing private companies to promote speech they otherwise wouldn't?
It's certainly a kind of extensive use of the term of jawboning that has come up over the last several years. And it's a kind of pressure that absolutely interferes with free speech. And it's also the kind of weaponizing of our federal agencies in support of a particular actor, a particular business person.
It seems to me that these actions affect not just the companies or the individuals that are the target of this abuse, but they're also to scare off everyone else from engaging in that behavior. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what we're seeing right now with just this essentially a kind of avalanche of restrictions and intimidations of free speech in this country, that it's designed to chill that kind of debate. It's designed to chill whistleblowers, to chill scientists, to chill professors and students. I think that's essentially what we're witnessing right now.
My time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Generally yields back.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent.
You see request from Gentleman Calford?
Yes, I ask unanimous consent that the Politico ad or news that was dated June 27, 2025, saying Gavin Newsom sues for $787 million be placed in the record.
Without objection. Mr. Price, has anything in the Digital Services Act changed in the last year?
No, sir.
Hasn't been amended, hasn't been changed at all?
No, sir.
So everything Mr. Breton wrote 1 year ago today, well, August 12, 2024, that's still in place, where he said to an American running an American company about an interview that was yet to happen, future happening interview, threatened this individual. None of that nothing in the law has changed that would change what actions this individual took.
Nothing in the law.
Just because Mr. Breton's gone doesn't mean Ms. Verkunen can't do the same darn thing, right?
Precisely.
Yeah, and that's the concern. Mr. Price, is this statement, we need to take back our country, is that statement hate speech?
We don't really know what hate speech is. It's so vague, and that's the problem with it. I wouldn't regard that as
well, you may not, but the EU regulators do, because they had a workshop on May 25th where this is part of our investigation, material we'd subpoenaed. They gave us this information. They said it is hate speech. That's a concern, right?
Yes, sir.
And it could be made by an American and be termed hate speech, and there could be some ramifications for Americans' First Amendment liberties. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Price, what's a trusted flagger?
A trusted flagger is an NGO or a private organization that's recognized under the DSA, and if they identify or a complaint has been made...
Wait. Recognized by who?
Oh, the terms of the DSA. Oh, and the national regulators and the commission as well.
Okay, and they do what? So they're recognized by the government. They're approved by the government.
Yes,
all right? And what do?
If they identify content that they regard as illegal content, the companies have to give priority to removing that content.
Oh, so people that the government approves tell companies what they can allow on their platform and what they can't, right?
That's correct, sir.
And the same people who approved these folks are the same people who conducted the workshop and said, we need to take back our country as hate speech. Is that fair to say?
That's correct, sir.
Yeah, and that's the concern. And what happens if these trusted flaggers approved by the government, the same government that says we need to take back our country as hate speech? By the way, I think that statement is made probably more by Democrats right now than Republicans. I think the head of the Democrat National Committee made that statement like 3 months ago at a big Democrat rally or something they were having. So the same people who say that's hate speech approve the trusted flaggers, who then tell the platforms what they can and can't have on their platform. And if they don't agree with what the trusted flaggers say, there's civil penalties. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Both under national law and the DSA, investigations begin, and there's a whole process that can result in enforcement and then ultimately crippling fines for companies.
And those crippling fines, those civil penalties can be what, 5%, 10% of global revenue, depending on the Online Services Act or the DSA?
Under the DSA, 6%.
6%? Wow, that's a lot of money because these are big companies, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Farage, it's not just civil penalties, though. And this is where it gets really scary. Because my understanding is there's criminal penalties, and I think in 2023 in the United Kingdom, there were 12,183 arrests for offensive posts. 12,000 people arrested for things they posted online that some trusted flagger approved by the government, the same government that says what's being said at the Democrat National Committee, we need to take back our country, is hate speech. That's a scary scenario. Is that right?
Yeah, they're massive statistics, and I mean, some of it comes under non-crime hate incidents. So you've said something on social media, someone's taken objection, and you get the knock at the door from the police sort of warning you that if you do this again, something may happen. And this has now been broadened out. I mean, Mr. Price made the point, what is hate speech? How do you define hate speech? And that's the problem, isn't it, with all of these laws, that we finish up in a position where local police forces, etc., have to choose their own interpretations. I think, again, as I said to you earlier, the timing of this hearing today is perfect because the head of the Metropolitan Police, who arrested Graham Linehan at Heathrow Airport, he's thrown the ball back now to the British Home Secretary and the government to say, please tell us, what is this law intended? What are we supposed as the police to do? So I think we're going to have a much more rapid debate about this. But my worry is it may get worse, if I may quickly. Because the Labour government now are intending to pass a law that has a definition of Islamophobia. They're intending to put that into law. And that effectively will mean that criticism of a religion, mocking of a religion, would become an offence. And that's totally against everything. Because, you know, we've always given the Pope a hard time. We've always given the Archbishop of Canterbury a hard time. So we're finishing up kind of with two-tier law and two-tier justice.
Well, speaking,
and that's very concerning.
I had one other question I'd like to get from maybe you and Mr. Price, if I could. Speaking of religion, tell me what performative prayer is. This is something we've seen and we've discovered in our investigative work. Maybe we'll start with Mr. Price, then go to Mr. Farage.
Yes, sir. We have a client at the moment who's been prosecuted or who was arrested in Bristol for a Christian pastor preaching about the differences between Christianity and Islam. He was then assaulted by a group of people identifying as Islamic people. The police arrived and they arrested him, not the people who assaulted him. This is the state of play in the United Kingdom in terms of free speech. And unfortunately, across Europe, I mean, I have a whole file of cases here where people have been arrested for criticisms of Islam where they've been prosecuted. So things are getting pretty bad.
Yeah, that extends to abortion clinics, doesn't it? And the abortion debate in Britain and Europe is different to the abortion debate in America. It's in a different place. But we have seen people warned or arrested if they've been seen to be praying outside abortion clinics, even if they're doing it silently. Hence, it's performative in the sense they're doing that. And you know, I'm afraid you now have to be a certain distance away from one of these clinics. But if other members of the public object and say that your praying there is causing them psychological harm, well, the police may intervene.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I comment on one of these issues, just very briefly?
I'm fine if the ranking member, okay. I may have to ask you a question after you comment. When you do that, go ahead.
I realize I'm opening the door.
Yeah.
I just wanted to note on this question of what is hate speech. First off, the question of identifying hate speech is not something that happens in a vacuum. In the UK, in Europe, there are very strict rules around the definition of hate speech that connect it not merely to speech, but to incitement. So it's incitement to violence or hatred or discrimination. And I think that's just an important baseline point, that this isn't just about pure speech, it's about the kind of speech that might lead to violence. And related to that, when you mentioned this hypothetical of take back our country, and is that hate speech? My understanding is that that came up in the context of a hypothetical related to persistent harassment of a Muslim girl. And that was the hypothetical. And the question was, in that particular context, did that constitute a kind of incitement to some violence against this young girl? So I think it's important to put some of these kinds of abstract questions into that kind of context.
Professor, did you agree with the Biden administration when they established the Disinformation Governance Board?
I didn't take a position on that. I do think that disinformation is an issue that
The government should be deciding what we can say and what we can't?
Absolutely not.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I'll give the ranking member a little extra time if he so desires. With that, I'll recognize the gentleman from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And firstly, I was pleased to join on the Codell. And it was a very fine, good Codell. I appreciate the chair, my friend and my classmate from 2006. One of the things I found most heartening about the Codell, we had a tour of Parliament, and along with us were two conservative members who were, I think they were either in House of Lords, maybe one was in the Lords and one was in the House of Commons, but they talked to us about Magna Carta and about how it's the basis of our laws, and there was a copy there and copies here and there and whatever, but how precious the Magna Carta is. And they suggested to us that a legislator, this was in the House of Lords where he spoke, that a legislator is not somebody who votes. A legislator's job is not just to vote. A legislator's job is to stand up to an out-of-control executive. Very telling for British Parliament members to instruct us on what we should be doing, and I thank him for that. I'm a strong supporter of free speech and always have been, but I find this hearing a bit disingenuous because of the problems we have here in America. Free speech includes the speech of those with whom we disagree, people who say vile things, and in my case, I find racist and anti-Semitic and Islamophobic type speech is something I find foul, but it's protected by free speech and offensive speech as well. That does not mean that there aren't limitations, however, and speech can be harmful, dangerous, and infringe on other people's rights. It isn't a free-for-all, though. And the U.S. and our First Amendment does not have a monopoly on what constitutes free speech. There is speech protected by the First Amendment, like corporate political donations, which I think is misplaced and misapplied. And there are times when our legal system itself suppresses disfavored speech. I passed the Speech Act in the 111th Congress. I think Mr. Issa was my co-sponsor, and it dealt with the fact that Britain is a favored nation for defamation actions, and it's easy to get a defamation judgment there. We would not allow those judgments to be recognized here in our country under the Speech Act if the activities that took place did not conform to our laws on free speech. And I would think Mr. Farage could try to look at changing their laws on defamation and contour more to what we see in the First Amendment, and that might be good for the people in England. Two of my good friends, most revered friends, were from England, London, Christopher Hitchens and Sir Bill Browder. And they've written books, and they could be subject to such laws as well. But work on protecting your English authors, who, from Shakespeare on, they've been pretty good. We used to be bipartisan in these efforts to look out for free speech, but President Trump has taken on free speech in ways that would never been thought about. And I think Ms. Lorcán brought some points to
the level of projection. Like, we didn't live through 2021 and 2024 with the
as well.
most censorship
Trump,
I'd experienced in
Mr.
my
Dahlia
lifetime.
Said clearly, but so many other people have said it and felt it, is bringing us on the verge of an autocratic state. And his actions in trying to bring law firms to their knees, colleges to their knees, federal employees, students, et cetera, is anti-free speech, anti-opportunity, and fear for themselves and their futures if they speak out. Even Congress people could be subject in the future, I'm sure, with some of the ways we're seeing this Justice Department act with questions about their speech. Our president has sued every broadcasting company almost, and they've gone after CNN, they've gone after NBC, and they pick some of these fringe people to pick on the Ukrainian president about his attire. It's bizarre what's going on in our country, and I'm concerned. They try to silence and shake down those
It's not bizarre, man. All right, listen, this guy, Cohen, you've had enough. Look, it's not about just about his attire. He's dressed for war. We want peace. He looks like he wants death. You send signals with the things that you wear. So when you wear something like what's his Zelensky wore to the White House, it's a signal, and it's not a great one. And he is a nuisance.
Slavery like war.
Sorry. Onward.
Nothing good about it. So we shouldn't be trying to. Professor Kay, how would you compare, from your expertise, how we evaluate and compare with relative states of freedom of expression written in the United States? Where do you see the comparisons?
Well, I think right now we're at a very dismal place in the United States, but I do think that it's also worth thinking a bit about some of the issues that Mr. Farage raised. So, for example, he mentioned the issue of a law against Islamophobia, but there's also a lot of discussion about laws against anti-Semitism and against other attacks on people on their status, on the basis of their religion and so forth. Those are actually valuable conversations to have. But you can't just sort of pick and choose which censorship or which restrictions are okay and which are not. You really need to have a general view as to what's appropriate. And I think, again, the chairman's point about censorship being a focus on criticism is the appropriate one. And to the extent that we can make that comparison, which country is really doing more, or which countries are really doing more to tamp down, to silence critics, that's the harm to our democracy. And right now I see that more in the United States than I see in Europe or the UK.
Thank you,
I'm a gentleman,
Professor.
Mr. Barber.
And I'd just like to say to you, welcome. I have a lot of British friends and respect for Britain. I have a great time when I'm there, but I'm happy we won the war.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the statement that Trump is bringing us to the edge of being an autocratic state in and of itself disproves the premise of that statement. Think about that. It's absurd. Under the First Amendment, the general proposition is that government should not be regulating the content of its citizens' speech. You have the opposing idea that it's the responsibility of government to decide not only what its citizens should think, but what content they are allowed to see and engage with. To some, the reality of the government regulation of speech may sound like it's a distant, authoritarian notion that won't come to the United States of America, but I would ask you to just think back again. I'm reminded of Orwell's 1984. Think of the memory hole that people are trying to memory hole right now, some even on this panel, sir, who don't want you to realize how bad a government can be when it attempts to censor right here in the United States. For instance, President Obama, this is from an article I'd asked for unanimous consent. President Obama has been the most aggressive administration in history, not only going after whistleblowers, but after pursuing reporters who write their stories. How about this one, the Biden legacy? How about this whole stack, and I'll put these in just a second, is convenient to memory hole what the Biden administration did, what they did to suppress dissent and contrary opinion. I'll get into that in a second. The actions of European governments show that the type of censorship by government is not only possible, but very much doable. Under the guise of public safety, government officials in Europe have suppressed and arrested individuals who have simply engaged in political speech that is arbitrarily deemed to be unspeakable by the government. This kind of regime doesn't just appear on the scene, though. It takes time to develop. And we've seen it here, and that's why I'm taking this opportunity to remind you that FISA must be reformed. FISA must be reformed. So, Mr. Price, you alluded to this, and so I have this document right here that compares the GDP growth of EU versus the U.S. 1998 to 2023. And the U.S. has grown about 87%, almost 90%. The EU has increased its GDP by about 13%. So you have almost a 6x variable there. The question is, when you set these kind of draconian fines and you set up a system that is amorphous and almost indefinable, might it not also have some more than just even the safety, ostensible safety of the society? Might it lead to trying to regulate when you can't innovate?
I think that's very much the case, sir. We've seen it not just in the area of speech, but obviously, as we were discussing, the Digital Markets Act, data protection, and so on. And Europe is facing some very serious structural problems demographically, financially. And a lot of what I think is inspiring the DSA is what we saw from Germany beginning after the election of President Trump and after Brexit, which is to control the narrative, slow down speech. And into that, then, they're throwing a very wide net out that's affecting all kinds of legitimate speech. We talked about my client, Päivi Räsänen, in Finland, who's prosecuted for sharing a tweet from the Bible. It's absolutely outrageous. And that becomes now the standard that the DSA will set, not just for Europe, but possibly and predictably globally.
And similarly, Mr. Reed, that's what's going to happen to your app innovators. They're not going to be able to have access to 440 million people in a marketplace in Europe without having to go through essentially government censorship.
Well, I think you hit it earlier when you said that that their focus has been on regulating or adding legislation. And it isn't one piece of regulation or one piece of legislation that has caused problems for our innovators, both in the UK, in the EU, and in America. It's been the stacking effect. Because if you start with one regulation, you say, I can handle that, I'll build that into my business. It's when you have one, then two, then four, then six. So what's been the biggest problem for growth has been their answer is that old quip, the beatings will continue until morale improves. We often feel that way about regulation. Innovation will get regulated until we get more innovation, and I don't think that will work out.
Thanks, Mr. Reed. Now I'll finish with you, Mr. Farage. What happened to the great countries of the West? I mean, seriously, and their liberal understanding of civil rights and the ability to speak one's mind openly without fear of arrest or censorship or abuse of harassment by the government?
I think what went wrong in many ways is we forgot why we actually had those liberties and had those freedoms in the first place. We forgot that, as I mentioned, I touched on earlier, we forgot the huge sacrifices that were made by citizens alive at that time to defend those principles against tyranny and against dictatorship. We've kind of lost our way in understanding why we are as we are, and I think that has permeated through the education system, or I'm not sure we've been teaching good values. The slavery comment was made earlier. I completely understand there's nothing good about slavery, but take our country, we spent decades driving slavery off the high seas. So whilst we were perpetrators to begin with, we actually, in the end, drove it off the high seas. So we need to teach our kids a sense of balance about our history, about the sacrifice that's been made. That's my feeling.
Mr. Chairman, I have some unanimous consent.
Gentleman is recognized.
This one, GDP growth comparison, EU to US, 1998 to 2023. This one, Biden's press freedom legacy, empty words and hypocrisy. Massive government censorship during and about COVID from the New Civil Liberties Alliance. The Fifth Circuit agrees that federal officials unconstitutionally coerced or encouraged online censorship under the Biden administration. This one, information during the pandemic suppressed. Feds blew $267 million fighting misinformation under Biden as Trump vows to ban censorship cartel. This one, how the FBI violated the privacy rights of tens of thousands of Americans. This one, Inspector General report on FBI's FISA abuse tells us one thing: we need radical reform. This one, UK comedy writer Graham Linehan arrested over social media posts criticizing trans activists. Why did Lucy Connolly receive a 31-month sentence for Southport tweet? Policing thought crime should have no place in the UK. Britain's emerging police state. Knock, knock, it's the thought police. As thousands of criminals go uninvestigated, detectives call on a grandmother. Her crime, she went on Facebook to criticize labor counselors. This one, UK steps up free speech crackdown as armed police arrest comedy writer Graham Linehan at Heathrow Airport. And this one, Britain's new thought police, how labor plans to police your online speech. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Without objection.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to offer two unanimous consent requests. I'm not going to challenge the farce as much as the gentleman and the others, but two that records letters to you, one to you and one to Commissioner Verkunen, pushing back on the framing of this hearing from 30 EU and U.S. academics.
Thank you. Without objection. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Farage, welcome to the United States of America. This isn't your first time here, correct?
Correct.
You were here in 2024 in Milwaukee, weren't you?
I've been coming here since 1982 on a very regular basis. I work for American companies.
What purpose were you coming to Milwaukee for? Why did you come to Milwaukee?
I've been in Milwaukee many times. I think that particular
in 2024 was
convention.
The convention, the Republican convention.
I think that's right. I think you're right.
The Trump convention.
I think you're right. Very good.
Where Trump was coronated.
Well, he won, didn't he? I mean, yes,
he had already won.
Happened,
we already knew who had won.
It's called political
parties. And it was
parties.
his coronation, and you attended, and you also attended Trump rallies, correct?
I've attended lots of Trump rallies.
Make America Great Again rallies,
yes.
many of them. And you
upbeat,
publicly,
optimistic, happy, wonderful, joyous events.
Publicly endorsed his...
I thoroughly enjoyed them. I've even spoken to
You endorsed him for president, and you attended his election night watch party.
I did.
And you consider Trump to be your mentor, correct?
No.
He's not your mentor?
No.
But
Sorry.
he is somebody who you want the support of, and you have the support.
Yes,
of.
I do. I think he's a very, very brave man.
Because you are getting ready to run for Prime Minister of Great Britain, correct?
Oh, I've been trying for years, yeah.
And as it stands right now, you head up a party. How many seats in the Parliament are there?
651, if you include the Speaker, that is.
650.
Yes.
And how many are a part? How many seats does your party hold?
How many seats do the opinion polls say we're going to get next time? Is that your
No,
question?
I mean,
I
the
see.
numbers don't lie. You only have 4 seats, right?
I'm afraid so, yes.
And so you are indeed the leader of a fringe party.
Oh, I'm a fringe, all right. Don't worry about that. Yes, absolutely. Everything I've ever done.
And as a fringe party leader seeking to run for Prime Minister of Great Britain, you need a lot of money in order to blow up like the MAGA movement has blown up.
What you need is a message of truth and a message of hope. And
well, you need money also, right?
Well, money's helpful, but it's not the primary thing you need.
So the first thing that came out of the chair's mouth this morning during his opening statement,
if you're out there,
had to do with Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And you're carrying water for Elon Musk today, aren't you?
From what I can see, Elon Musk is abusive about me virtually every single week. But it's a free country, so
I mean, but you
he's
never
entitled
stop
to do
trying
that.
to
him and Elon, I think, are at odds, maybe. I think Elon was talking crap about Farage even appearing.
You are familiar with the fact.
wrong.
You are familiar with the fact, Mr. Farage,
I have had a public fallout with Elon Musk.
That Donald Trump's campaign benefited to the extent of $250 million from Elon Musk.
Well, I mean, how much?
You are familiar with that, correct?
How much did Mrs. Zuckerberg give to the Democrats? I mean, this is what happens, and people are.
Well, he didn't give any money
on Musk. Let me be clear.
To the Democrats. He was sitting behind Trump with the rest of the tech bros, and you are here today to impress all of those tech bros, including Elon Musk. Isn't that correct?
I'm going to answer your question very, very honestly.
You need money from Elon Musk in order to get elected Prime Minister of Great Britain. That's the bottom line. Isn't that correct?
We consider all day, as long as the chairman allows us. I don't mind. I had a very public falling out with Elon Musk.
But you're still trying to get some money from him, though.
Over a political issue.
It's not about the prior disputes.
I'm sorry,
you're trying to ingratiate yourself with the tech bros by coming over here and trying to.
Can I get a cup of coffee or something?
And you're arguing.
Be here a long time.
What you're arguing is that the citizens of Great Britain should pay a tariff if these tech companies are not allowed to violate the laws of Great Britain.
No, I'm not. That was a falsehood put out by the British Prime Minister today.
You didn't say in your
Prime Minister's questions. I have never.
In your statement.
I have never suggested any of the kind.
You don't call
My statement
for tariffs
is very clear.
as tools to
My
force
statement is
Great
very
Britain.
clear. My statement is very.
You are not
it
calling
might surprise you.
You are not
Mr.
calling
Johnson.
for.
It might surprise you to know
tariffs and trade sanctions.
Trade. You may not know this, but trade between our countries is actually rather important. You are the biggest investor in our country, and we're the biggest investor in yours.
Time of the gentleman from Georgia has expired, but the gentleman should be able to say some kind of
here to the United
Regular
States
order, Mr. Chairman.
He's
been rude, he's been disgusting, he's been hilarious.
Hang on. No. The gentleman's time has expired. I feel like we should give Mr. Farage a chance to respond to one of the many questions he was not allowed to respond to. So we'll give you 30 seconds, Mr. Farage, and then we'll move on to our next one. Because I know Mr. Farage does have to leave in about an hour, so we want to get through as many members as we can.
Number one, I had a public fallout over a political issue with Elon Musk. I can't be bullied by anybody. I haven't changed my mind. Last time I looked, he was being spectacularly rude about me yesterday. That's life. If we believe in free speech, we live with it. What I have made very clear.
Fixated on.
What I've made. Sorry, no, this is my turn, I think.
Yeah, you got another
Thank
15
you, Mr.
seconds.
Chairman. What I've made perfectly clear in this paper is the situation we've got with successive pieces of legislation, including now the Online Safety Act, is a danger to trade between our countries. And allies and friends and trading partners have honest conversations with each other. I hope many American companies and politicians have honest conversations with the British government.
done it.
I've not suggested sanctions at all in any way.
Good luck on your race.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd remind my colleague from Georgia that President Trump was openly nominated after decisively winning the primary votes across the country. That's in open contrast to the Democratic nominee, who has decreed the nominee of her party in spite of the fact she did not receive a single primary vote. So I would be a little careful if I were him about talking about coronations. I do agree with my Democratic colleagues that we need to be on guard against suppression of free speech, whether it's coming from the left or the right. But I disagree with them that the chief executive regulating the executive branch's communications or conforming executive agencies and grantees to executive policy is somehow a threat to free speech. The executive branch is designed to speak with one voice, a voice chosen every 4 years by the people. And I disagree with them that suing for defamation is an infringement on speech in a legal system where the truth is an absolute defense. The threat to democracy is from the government regulating other people's communications. Now, we're now discovering that the Biden administration used the FBI to pressure tech companies to censor the communications of the American people over a free discussion of everything from COVID policy and origins, the Russian collusion hoax, Biden family influence peddling, climate change. I myself was the victim of this censorship when I warned of the damage that the COVID lockdowns were causing. Now, democracy assumes that the best way to separate truth from lies, or wisdom from folly, or good from evil, or love from hate, is to place the two of them side by side and then trust the common sense and good judgment of the people to know the difference. But this assumes that the people have full and unfettered freedom to express themselves and to challenge the claims and opinions of each other. Now, some of our colleagues seem to be suggesting that we should transfer that prerogative from the people to the government. That's the very definition of authoritarianism. Mr. Farage, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you know, we are, as citizens, we should be free to make our minds up, to express our opinions, to a large extent to make our own mistakes, provided, and we all know there's a limit to free speech. You know, the professor talked about incitement earlier, and of course, you know, we would be absolutely joined together on that. We don't want incitement, we don't accept incitement, and if people put out something irrational or insightful, but very quickly put their hands up and apologize and learn their lesson, that's kind of how the world is. I do not want government to be the arbiter of what I should think.
We have a word for that. It's demoskratis, ruled by the people.
So yes,
democracy.
I'm with you on that. I also agree with you that COVID, I touched on this earlier, it was during COVID when rational debate about many important issues, be it mask wearing, be it lockdowns, rational debate on these things was frankly stamped out, and this was supported by big social media companies, many, not GB News obviously, but many TV stations, etc. It's a very dark period that we're coming out of.
In this country, what we're discovering is that was being done under pressure by the FBI, directed by the executive branch of the government under Joe Biden. But just briefly, how did this happen to the UK and the EU, and what lessons should we be drawing here today?
Well, we joined the EU half a century ago, or the EEC as it was then called. It was a huge mistake, in my opinion. We forgot about common law, the kind of law that you guys have always enjoyed too. We sort of gradually transferred to a European way of thinking. We incorporated a Human Rights Act, which kind of meant really that, you know, as opposed to being born free, under a human rights regime, the state gives you your rights, for which you're supposed to be incredibly grateful, but they can take them away whenever they like. So we lost our bearings. The UK lost its way. It became obsessed about doing things a European way, countries, frankly, that don't have that history of liberty, freedom, and democracy that we do.
Finally, what do you see as the shape of things to come? Are we going to regain these freedoms or lose them?
Well, ultimately, the people have to get what they vote for. And one of the reasons that we are seeing an extraordinary political revolution that is happening in parts of Europe, and if you believe the polls, what is happening in the United Kingdom right now is we want a government that comes in and gets rid of all these laws and starts again. And starts on the basis, yes, we want to try and protect kids, and we will do whatever we can that is practical to protect kids from serious harm online. But we will get back to the idea that I can insult you, you can insult me, Mr. Raskin and I can have our chats, but we do it, in a spirit that's not insightful and in a way that honors those who built our great countries. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Well done. The gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, it wasn't too long ago that Democrats and Republicans on this committee together agreed to undertake a 16-month investigation into the anti-competitive practices of big tech companies. I represent many of them in Seattle, and proposed bipartisan legislation, which actually passed this committee, to restore fairness and competition for consumers and small businesses. That included the American Choice and Innovation Online Act, or ACOIA, which included similar common sense structural solutions to what the EU included in the Digital Markets Act. And it was a real recognition that these big tech companies are squelching competition and innovation, and that hurts consumers. It's a big turnaround then that suddenly the Republican majority wants to do something as absurd as use trade negotiations to help bolster big tech in Europe when EU has undertaken the very smart solutions that fight back against big tech monopolies and protect consumers and small businesses. Maybe it's linked to the fact that these big tech companies are now pouring money into Donald Trump's campaign funds. I don't know. Maybe it's because they're making all kinds of deals to screw consumers and preference giant corporations in exchange for campaign contributions and a 24-karat gold plaque to Donald Trump, like the CEO of Apple just recently did. It seems to me that the Republican Party has suddenly turned its back on small businesses, on competition, on innovation, and yes, even on free speech, which is apparently the topic of discussion today. In fact, one of our witnesses here claims to represent, one of the Republican witnesses claims to represent small and medium-sized app developers, but his organization gets more than half of its funding from Apple, the very giant corporation that those same small and medium-sized app developers are trying to fight. Make it make sense for me. Now we have this hearing centered around so-called free speech and so-called censorship, not here in America, but in Europe. Well, what about right here at home on U.S. soil, the censorship by the Trump administration, the Republican Party, on anything that they don't agree with? Let's just take a recent example. Ramesa Ozturk, a PhD student at Tufts University, wrote an op-ed in the student newspaper calling for the university to divest from Israel. It was a simple exercise of her First Amendment free speech rights. She committed no crime, she didn't bully or harass anyone, she didn't incite violence towards anyone. Action was totally peaceful. And yet, what happened? In March, the Trump administration revoked her student visa, sent masked men to kidnap and disappear her, forcing her into an unmarked car, and detained her for 45 days. Professor Kaye, how does this kind of abuse, utilizing the immigration system, in this case for now, can extend to U.S. citizens, to green card holders, to anyone else? How does this hinder the free speech rights of all Americans?
Well, we've seen already that American citizens have been caught in the enforcement of immigration laws over the last, and outside of the immigration laws over the last several months. But I think we can look at it from two perspectives. I mean, one is it's a clear violation of a student's free speech right, as you just explained it, when they're detained and set up for deportation solely because of an op-ed that they wrote. But it's also an intimidation for anybody who would write anything further. Anybody who's in that same kind of visa situation now is not going to be writing that op-ed. And that's not just a harm to them. That's not just chilling their speech. That's also a harm to all of us who would benefit from hearing those kinds of views.
In fact, right now, the Trump administration is reviewing all social media of visa applicants to see if they've posted any anti-Trump or pro-Palestinian sentiments. How does that affect our free speech rights?
Well, it's the same answer. It's a deterioration of our public debate in this country. It's exactly this kind of, I think that Mr. McClintock had said before, putting side by side different ideas, and that's an interference with that.
So quickly, another example. In June, a Spanish-language reporter named Mario Guevara was live streaming a gathering of Americans protesting against Trump's immigration policy. The police arrested him on bogus misdemeanor charges that were later dropped. A few days later, he was detained by ICE. Now we've got a government that arrests a student for writing an op-ed, filters the speech of visitors, and arrests a journalist for covering a protest. How does that compare to free speech practices of other countries?
Well, it does compare with authoritarians who regularly use law enforcement in order to transform journalism into a crime. This is a major global censorship problem, and we're seeing it in Georgia. And we see it in this context that is not just a one-off. It's part of, I think, a systemic approach to a free media in this country. That's one, and perhaps the harshest example, because I understand that the journalist remains in detention, but it's part of a systemic approach, I think.
Similar to Russia and China, places like that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I have some unanimous consent requests.
Do you want to go now, or do you?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you. I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the Open Markets Institute.
Without objection.
Another one, a letter from the Tech Freedom Association raising concerns with the FTC's inquiry on censorship.
Without objection.
And a final one from I think it's the App Association, and it's titled, Apple is top funder of lobby group that says it represents small developers.
Yeah. Without objection. If I could.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I have one more here.
Okay, go right ahead.
This is an article entitled, The False Choice Between Digital Regulation and Innovation.
Without objection.
Thank you, I yield back.
Quickly, Mr. Reed, is your association fighting Apple?
Pardon me?
Is your association fighting Apple?
Fighting Apple?
Fighting Apple?
We disagree with Apple on multiple issues, as well as for all of our sponsors. Our membership is the small businesses that many of you have met when we've had our fly-in every year.
Okay, great. Seems to me your association uses Apple. That's where your apps go. I don't think you're fighting Apple. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Professor Kaye, was the Centers for Disease Control correct in 2020 about the handling of COVID? You know, the chairman laid out all the things that we now know are debunked. Was the Center for Disease Control correct in how they went about their business?
I'm not a scientist, so I can't speak to that. I mean, I remember the time, like we all did, a time of great fear as
shutting
to what
down
was happening.
schools, things like that have set kids behind. See, because it's to Representative McClintock's point that wouldn't this administration want to change some people that you talked about that are in the Department of Health Services? Shouldn't they change them if they were wrong about really the seminal issue that has come before this generation? Shouldn't they change those people?
Well, that's just not my understanding of why people have been.
Are you familiar, Professor Kaye, with the case Berenson versus Biden, which is a censorship case where Alex Berenson, a reporter, was deplatformed on Twitter?
I'm not familiar with that one.
I would suggest that you take a look at that because the Biden administration weaponized themselves against Mr. Berenson and stifled his speech on Twitter. What college are you a professor at again?
University of California, Irvine.
How many classes are you teaching this semester?
This I teach one class right now.
One class this semester. Mr. Farage, I want to thank you so much for coming to the great state of Wisconsin, of which I represent part of it, including Milwaukee. I hope you had a good time there.
I've always had a good time in Milwaukee, no question. Wonderful breweries, friendly people, love it.
You're welcome back anytime. I want to thank the ranking member for giving us a tutorial on free speech. Mr. Farage, did you instruct anyone on this panel, including the chairman, to instruct us to stifle the ranking member's speech? Did you?
No, absolutely not. Of course not.
Can you comment on the key issue before the far right that we heard about earlier? What is that key issue in Europe right now that the far right is heavily engaged in?
Well, if you're in the United, I'll speak for the United Kingdom. If you're opposed to illegal immigration on a mass scale and the huge cost to the taxpayer and the risk to our communities, then and if you like the flag, our national flag, then apparently you're far right.
So that illegal immigration issue that was very informative to the election in 2024 in America, the same thing is happening in Europe? Is that accurate?
It's a very similar argument in many, many ways, and therefore the definition of far right, I think, now applies to about 2/3 of the British population.
So I think about someone who's very famous from your country, Ms. J.K. Rowling, who wrote one of the finest series of books, the Harry Potter series, that has ever been in print, who I believe is self-defined as a liberal, as we call them in America. Hasn't she even been threatened for a position she's taken in regards to transgenderism?
Yes, she very much comes from a liberal wing of politics historically, but she's taken a view that women should be safe in women's spaces. That means changing rooms, etc. That's all she said. And by the way, that's something that our Supreme Court recently actually did back up, the fact that there are fundamental differences. And this is not to launch an attack on anyone that's trans, just to bring some common sense in. And she has faced cancel culture and abuse on a huge scale.
I would just, one other comment in regards to the ranking member's opening statement. He was saying that we are stifling speech here in America, including PBS, by defunding them. I would suggest that the ranking member look at the news that came out in the past week. It is very good news for PBS, where the Ford Foundation and other foundations have said they're going to put in tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, to make sure that they stay on the air. Protecting the American taxpayer, I think that is a great thing that we were able to do with the One Big Beautiful Bill. Final question for Mr. Price. How is the problem going to be fixed, and can America help?
Yes, America can help. The spotlight that has already been shone on the problem by the administration, by the amazing work that this committee is doing here, is hugely welcome by those of us who support the human right to free speech. We have people who are suffering under prosecutions, unjust prosecutions in Europe right now. I've outlined a lot of them in my written submissions, and it's only because of the support that's coming from this side of the Atlantic that we're able to see possibly a brighter future.
And we will continue those efforts.
Thank you.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman, yield back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, when I was a professor of constitutional law, I used to teach my students that freedom of speech is like an apple. And everybody wants to take just one bite out of the apple. Somebody doesn't like left-wing speech. There's a bite. Somebody doesn't like right-wing speech. Somebody doesn't like feminist speech. Somebody doesn't like sexist speech. And everybody just wants to take one bite. But if we let everybody take a bite, at the end of the day, there's no apple left. It's all gone. So if you want to defend free speech and you want a society that's defined by free speech, you've got to accept even the speech you oppose, the speech that you abhor. Now, Professor Kaye, we want to try to bring some objectivity to the conversation. I looked up the Reporters Without Borders rankings of every country in the world, according to press freedom. Norway was number 1. North Korea was number 179. It's like a totalitarian dungeon. The UK was number 20. The US was number 57 under Trump, down from 45, where it was before. Russia, which some people here lionize, was at 171, right? So if we were going to undertake a serious study of the state of press freedom all over the world, for example, where should our focus be?
I appreciate that question. I have a very long list that I could highlight.
But just tell us methodologically, quickly, how we should go about doing it if we wanted to undertake this in a serious way.
Absolutely. I mean, I would really use the lens of what do we need as a democracy in order to be well-informed, in order to make choices about our democracy, to make choices about our health. What do we need? We need an open press. We need open government. We need access. We absolutely don't want to see websites scrubbed, as this administration has done. So I would look at it through that lens, through the lens of what we need in order to have a democracy.
Gotcha. Mr. Farage, first of all, to be called charming by you, a man of your evident erudition and dazzling brilliance, is undoubtedly a Lifetime Achievement Award for me, so I will hold it closely. But I wanted to ask you about your commitment to the freedom of speech universally. I think it's a principle that you advocate for everyone, not just for people who are in your party or people you agree with. You said that there should not have been a protest against the Gaza war in the UK. And then when it went ahead, the police refused to shut it down. You called them gutless for not shutting it down. Do you regret having opposed that, given that there was no violence there and there were 700,000 people who wanted to express themselves that day?
I have not opposed people standing up and protesting in favor of people living in Gaza at all. There was one particular day, and it was the Sunday nearest November the 11th, which was when we had big memorial services in London, and I think a march being allowed to go ahead on that day would have been a mistake. Any other day, fine.
Oh, I see. Who gets to decide that?
Well, I think actually something that is embedded in the country, something that is absolutely fundamental to.
That's why we have a written constitution. You might take that idea back to the UK with you.
Well,
because the freedom of speech applies 365 days a year here under the First Amendment, not 364, 363, depending on some politicians heckling the government and telling them to shut down free speech.
We have allowed mass pro-Gaza demonstrations in London weekend after weekend.
No thanks to you.
Weekend.
All right, let me change.
This was
let me try another one.
particularly sensitive day. That's all.
I got you. It was a sensitive day. And I thought that's what the freedom of speech was about. You have a right to engage in speech that other people consider offensive or insensitive. But in any event, you've made yourself clear, Mr. Farage.
364 days a year if they want.
You've made yourself clear to your constituents in Claxton today. Let me ask you this. You've banned journalists from your political events that you disagree with, haven't you?
No, in fact, I'm the only political
Really?
leader
At your
in Britain.
convention, you didn't ban journalists and revoke their credentials?
You know, I take the average press conference, I take 25 questions.
No, that wasn't my question. Mr. Farage, we're politicians, so we see what you're doing. I'm asking you a direct question.
Well, thank you. I'm very pleased
I'm
you
asking
do.
you a direct question, and I hope you can answer it. Why do you ban journalists who oppose your views from coming to your events? Why did you tell your party, why did you tell the local government not to do interviews with your local newspaper?
I am the most open person to any journalist.
Undoubtedly, you're the handsomest man in the world. But I'm asking you a different question, okay?
Day.
That's not my question. My question for you is, and it's legit, why do you ban journalists that you disagree with from your political events, like from your convention?
I don't.
Okay, and you say you've never done that?
I can't think, if I go back the last 25 years, I can't think of banning anybody. But I mean, maybe somebody else did. But look,
I see. It was somebody else who did it.
I do more. I take more questions.
All right.
From journalists.
Do you have
all
any
the other
objections?
Leaders added up together.
Okay, Mr. Price, let me ask you. You're an honest man. Do you have any objection to the things you've heard about what Donald Trump is doing in the United States of America, going after law firms, for example, banning them from federal buildings and federal courthouses, stripping them of security clearance, saying they can never get federal jobs or contracts because he doesn't like something one of the lawyers at the firm did? Do you think there's a First Amendment problem with that, as our courts have found?
There's a lot of information you've put into that. It's good to talk to you again after London.
Yeah, have you followed that at all?
I haven't. I have to be perfectly honest with you now.
Okay, do you have any problems with anything Donald Trump has done with respect to free speech and freedom of expression in America? Or you just haven't followed it?
I'm not as well. There are plenty of people here better informed on American matters than I.
And we are. So thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. I yield back.
I think the gentleman, my guess is Mr. Farage takes press questions probably as often as President Trump does. These are two guys who aren't afraid to talk to the press and take any question that comes to them. We've seen that display time and time again. The gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it was an honor to be with you and the ranking member as we had the chance to see firsthand what's going on in the EU and in the UK. Maybe this Raskin-Farage show could become a recurring event. It's gotten very interesting on both occasions. But I'd actually like to direct my questions to you, Mr. Price, at first. It's good to see you again. I think that those of us on the trip were really alarmed by the ways in which the tide is turning against free speech in the UK and the EU. And I think that there actually was quite a bit of bipartisan agreement among the members of our delegation on a number of these issues. So I was hoping you could give us a little context of what you think explains this. And I think that we understand that not every country needs to have has a First Amendment or needs to have the exact same standards or the exact same exceptions or the exact same ways that the law is applied. But we've always, I think, felt it important that we have an alliance with our European allies around the issues of freedom that stands in contrast to authoritarian regimes around the world, like in Russia, like in China, places where they don't have free speech. And so to the extent that these values are fraying among our allies, then it really harms our ability to stand up for the values of freedom around the world. So what do you think is going on? How can we sort of strengthen our alliance with our European allies around the issue of freedom of speech?
Thank you, sir. Well, what we've seen, sadly, over many decades, and it's accelerating, has been a consistent use of overbroad, vague laws to crack down on speech that's regarded as provocative or unorthodox. And I can give you, and I have given examples of the clients that I'm involved in representing, where they've been simply speaking about their faith publicly or where they've been offering to talk to people. So things have reached a crisis point, though, and this is why I think it's important that Vice President Vance and the administration have intervened. And one thing I would say, without divulging any contents of conversations, but Representative Raskin and I had quite a good conversation about just how bad things had become in Europe. And I agree with you. I think there is a bipartisan realization, certainly on this committee, and I commend the work that it's doing, about the nature of the problem in Europe. With the DSA, though, we find then the European Union stepping into speech, regulating it, and bringing that restrictive model global. And this is where I think really the work that's been happening here is crucial, because we can't allow that to happen, because we're going back to COVID-style censorship all over again.
Thank you. And of course, it's doubly concerning when this actually implicates the free speech rights of Americans. But I would hope that moving forward, we can try to work with our counterparts in Europe to try to get back to having these shared values around freedom of speech, and we don't continue to see a divergence. Mr. Reed, I also wanted to ask you about the DMA, because based on, I know you represent smaller app developers, but we also spoke with folks who represent Apple and Facebook and others, and it's a matter of public record the way that these companies are now sort of uniquely targeted under this law and the similar law in the UK. And honestly, it caused me to sort of see some of the ongoing negotiations around tariffs and other issues through a somewhat different lens, because the way that American companies are being targeted with the DMA really is a tax or imposes or is a direct transfer of wealth from our country overseas. And these are some of these sort of non-tariff barriers that American countries are now facing. So could you give me your perspective on that and the DMA more broadly?
Right. It's ironic that, as you say, it's a non-tariff trade barrier, but the ultimate biggest loser is usually the smaller and medium-sized companies. Earlier, we heard a member of this committee just talk about bills here in the United States. The irony of those who supported those bills were also billionaire companies. We joked about the fact that it was the trillionaires versus the billionaires who went to war. And the problem when that happens, if any of you run a small business, is the small guy gets crushed. And what's happening with the DMA in Europe is their desire to put pressure on the US companies means that there are fewer services, fewer features, and less trust are available for the smaller businesses to take advantage of. And that's how we get crushed, and that ends up being as you say, a non-tariff trade barrier, because it puts the very companies that could compete with these giants at a disadvantage when they have to meet those new tests.
Thank you. And I think that this is going to be an important issue for us to remain focused on, as to how we can alleviate these barriers that our companies are facing that honestly are hindering innovation in Europe as well. I yield back. Yield back to the chair.
Real clear on the most recent situation. Maybe I'll direct this to Mr. Farage. So Graham Lineman is an Irish citizen who posted something while in America and then gets arrested when he goes to the UK for some, quote, offensive post online. Is that accurate?
That is absolutely right.
Yeah, that's where this is all headed. That's exactly where this is all headed. The gentleman from California who accompanied us on the trip, when we were so glad that he did, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also appreciate being invited on a trip and spending time with you and our ranking member, Raskin. Very informative. Interesting looking at the DMA. winners and losers, unintended consequences. According to a recent report commissioned by the EC, the future of European competitiveness, only 4 of the 50 top tech firms in the world are actually in Europe. As a Californian, I found it very interesting that a lot of the European entrepreneurs move out of Europe, move to the US, specifically California, to grow, and then possibly move back to Europe. I'm a Californian, so the health and welfare, the interests of California firms is interest to me. And seeing hundreds of millions of dollars in fines under DMA's nebulous violations being levied against California firms, money that could be best spent on R&D in many ways, is very bothersome. I care about encouraging California entrepreneurs. We have the most successful entrepreneurs in the world today, yet they are essentially being targeted by the EU and other foreign regulations. California, this money is better, again, invested in creating jobs in California. And by the way, a lot of these firms that are actually being fined actually pay taxes in California. Today, California recently passed up Japan to become the 4th largest economy in the world. California is the number 1 producer of ag products in the world, number 1 in terms of venture capital in the US, number 1 manufacturer. We pay $100 billion more to the US federal government than we get back on an annual basis. So despite all the challenges we have in California, we actually know how to do it right. And surprisingly, our workforce, visa holders from other countries, workforce, undocumented workers from around the world that actually harvest their crops. Manufacturing, we are the top manufacturer in the United States in terms of state. A lot of undocumented workers there. So California, we actually can manage pretty well. The best managed state, I would argue, in the union. So Mr. Reed, I'm gonna ask you, given your association with these small firms, how is the DMA affecting our California firms as they try to grow in the European Union?
The ex-ante regulation creates barriers of entry.
What do you mean by ex-ante? Explain that to me.
In simple terms, it means that the European Union is determining the behavior before the bad act has happened. It's before it happens.
So they're fining before the actual behavior?
They're not just even fining, they're setting the rules by which you could be fined. The best way to think about it is they're saying, mother may I. If you remember the game Mother May I, they are asking companies to go forth and say, can we do this? And then the commission says, well, yes, you can, or yes, you cannot. We traditionally in the United States have taken an ex post, meaning, did you deceive someone? Did you lie? Did you cheat? Did you steal? And then you're punished. Unfortunately, the EU is taking a Mother May I approach rather than a punishment approach. And that harms California businesses because it makes it a lot harder to get in the door.
Mr. Price, you're from Irvine. Sorry. Yes? Mr. Price?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about
Irvine.
California firms and how the DMA. Okay. Well, Irvine, by the way, a lot of biotech, high tech.
I think you might be referring to Professor K.
Mr. K. I'm sorry, go ahead. Mr. K, Irvine.
Yes. Yes, I teach at the University of California at Irvine. I actually wanted to respond to 2 of the points that you're making, in part because...
You got about 20 seconds. Go.
Thank you. In part because this hearing is entitled as one dealing with censorship, and we're spending quite a bit of time talking about defending companies. And 2 things I just wanted to mention. One is the DMA doesn't specifically discriminate against American companies any more than it does against California companies. And the second is that I think it's important to think about the other...
Mr. Price, what would you say to that?
In relation to discrimination,
yes,
they've designed the rules in such a way that they almost perfectly encompass American companies, particularly under the DSA. So if you're setting the rules, and they just happen to throw a net over a particular target group, I think you can legitimately infer from that 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 was the intention.
The intention was discrimination?
The intention is to throw a dragnet over U.S. companies and turn them into a...
The intention is discrimination against American firms.
That's precisely what the outcome is.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And before I yield, I also have some articles I'd like to submit for the record, if I may.
Yep.
Letter by Chairman Fitzgerald and myself to President Trump, dated April 9th of this year, outlining our concerns with the Digital Marketing Act. Second, report by European Commission, dated September 24th, the future of European competitiveness, which is failing to translate into innovation. Third article, statement by the Chamber of Progress, dated February 10th, how Digital Markets Act has become Europeans' digital curtain. Number 4, article by the Information and Technology Foundation, dated June 30th, 6 ways the DMA is backfiring on Europe. 5th, article Washington Examiner, July 28th, EU regulations impose heavy costs on U.S. companies. Finally, article in the Journal, Wall Street, the tech industry is huge and Europe's share of it is very small. Thank you, sir.
Without objection, thank you. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas, recognized.
Thank the chairman. I thank you for holding this hearing. I thank the witnesses. Mr. Price, you referenced Päivi Räsänen earlier, correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you just real quick, in like 30 seconds, give the quick summary of what the facts are behind that issue with respect to why she is facing prosecution despite having served in Parliament and I believe as a minister in the government?
That's correct, sir. Over 5 years ago, she posted a tweet with a verse from Scripture, and in that tweet, she objected to her church, the Finnish Evangelical Lutheran Church, using church funds to fund the Helsinki Pride Parade. And for that, then, criminal proceedings were launched against her.
And she's been dealing with that for 4 to 5 years, correct?
That's correct, sir. Her case is before the Supreme Court at the end of October.
Facing jail time.
Facing significant fines.
And for having expressed her faith with respect to issues involving marriage in the context of a Bible verse, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And so now we've got, as the chairman illuminated a moment ago, we've got this issue involving Graham Lanahan, who here in the United States made a joke and then is arrested in the UK, correct?
Yes, he's being arrested, or he was arrested for comments that he posted while here.
And that's correct, Mr. Farage, you agree?
It is.
And that joke had something to do with, as I've looked it up, trans-identified males and female-only space, and he made some joke about that issue.
That's exactly right.
And so we've got now someone being arrested for alleged transphobia or some sort of hate comment involving a joke on another continent. Now, in the meantime, we've had Mr. Farage talking about Lucy Connolly, right? And her fate, which I understand she got sentenced something like 31 or 32 months for having put out a social media post. Now, that social media post has been alleged to have tied to some incitement. She deleted the post, but the post was in response to violence, right? And on the heels of a whole lot of issues involving crime in the UK. Whatever the connection is, right, we're saying there is crime in the UK. Now, here's my question, Mr. Farage. How do you feel from the standpoint of borders in the UK? Are open borders healthy for either the United States or the UK?
No, they're disastrous.
And are they having a deleterious effect with respect to crime and culture in the UK?
Yes, they are. It's been a debate that's been very difficult to have without being screamed at, but we are now having that debate.
And so now we've got a moment here where we've got someone being put in jail for putting out something on social media that is allegedly transphobic. And so my question is, I wonder what's going to win out? What's going to win out when the questions of Islamophobia and the tenets of Islam mash up against transphobia? What will the determiners of truth in the UK government decide? What will those who make decisions about what we can say and what we cannot say do when these worlds collide? Would you have any comment on that, Mr. Farage?
In the Lucy Connolly case, it's very interesting that this horrific murder of 3 young girls happened. The country was in very deep shock, very deep shock. The government deliberately withheld the truth about who the perpetrator was. And it led to a sea of speculation. It turned out ultimately that the man that committed those murders was in fact UK born, had not come over on a boat, as was being said on social media, just goes to show that actually, however bad the news is, people deserve to know the truth about a situation. It stops that frenzy of speculation. Who's going to win these great battles? I think that there is a growing, silent majority, certainly in my country, who object to the two-tier concept that, you know, Lucy Connolly gets 31. And by the way, there were mitigating circumstances for what she said with her own personal situation, but she's arrested very quickly. She's threatened that if she pleads not guilty, she'll go straight to prison and be on remand until the trial, and goodness knows when. We're not defending what she said, but she recognized her error, you know, in a moment of anger and passion and upset, and she withdrew it 3.5 hours later. I think that the answer, Mr. Roy, is that the silent majority will win. The silent majority will win, good will triumph over bad, and common sense will be returned. It won't happen quickly. It won't happen quickly. As I've already outlined, there is coming down the tracks an Islamophobia law, which would divide speech even more widely than it is now. But in the end, common sense, decency will win.
Is Sharia law consistent with Western values?
No.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Farage, thanks for being here, coming across the pond. I'm sorry to hear you're leaving the hearing early.
Well, there's not a question of leaving the hearing early, but I do have other things to do. Yes.
Oh, where are you going?
I'm so sorry about that.
It's okay. Where are you going?
It's not lunch, I promise you.
It's not lunch. You're not going to have lunch.
I don't think so, no.
No lunch.
Sad, isn't
You're
it?
meeting with the president?
I can't remember what the schedule is. It's possible.
You can't remember if you're meeting with the president.
I'm being very polite, and I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing this afternoon, but I can assure you that...
But there's the free speech hearing. You're not going to tell me what you're doing this afternoon?
Free speech is one thing, discretion's quite another, too.
Okay. All right, so you're leaving to have lunch with the president. So, Mr. Farage, I have a question. Have you heard about the Epstein thing that's going on here?
I have.
You have? What do you think about it?
I'm not going to give comment on anything happening in America. I'm here as a witness.
Perfect.
I'm here as a witness.
I'm
here as a witness for what is happening in the United Kingdom and in the European
Perfect.
time.
Let me just go through it. So it's been 9 months, right, since we've been meeting in these hearings. We've not had Pam Bondi here, even though we have jurisdiction over the Department of Justice, not Dan Bondi.
The gentleman yield.
Not Kash Patel. I will 100%. We'll go back and forth. Let me just do my thing.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to correct. Kash Patel's coming in 2 weeks. I'll give you an extra 10 seconds. Kash Patel, the director of FBI, is coming in 2 weeks, and the Attorney General's coming in 4 weeks.
Fantastic. But still, we're not doing that this week. The week we're having votes on the Epstein thing. So, you know, Pam Bondi gives the influencers, these Republican influencers, a binder. It says Part 1 of the Epstein files. Don't know if you saw it. It was quite spectacular. The Attorney General then says the Epstein list is on her desk. Then DOJ issues a memo, says there is no list. Then, you have any questions about any of that? We've had no hearings on any of that at all. That, you know, the list is on my desk, then there is no list. Then we gave binders to Republican influencers. This committee said no questions on any of how that transpired at the Department of Justice. Then hold on.
Well, it sounds like you're going to in the next few weeks. So that's a jolly good thing.
Mr. Farage, we can talk soon, but not yet. Okay.
Right.
So, then the president comes out and says the whole thing's a hoax. He blasts his own base. He blames Barack Obama. I mean, he hasn't been president for a very long time. Republicans then in committee vote against the release in the Rules Committee. Then Republicans refuse to go back in the Rules Committee because they're getting blasted for their vote, getting crushed by their own base. Congress leaves a day early. Then the administration sends the Deputy Attorney General to meet with Maxwell in jail. He happens to be Trump's former personal attorney. She says something favorable about the president. Miraculously, she gets transferred to a minimum security prison. The president starts talking about how he has the right to pardon her if he wanted to. The leaks to the Wall Street Journal then stop. We come back from break. We have the Massey petition. Comer does a document dump where 97% of these documents are already public. How long has he had those documents? Why hasn't he released them for the last 6 weeks? Does it the day of the vote. Then Republicans drop a non-binding resolution trying to kill the Massey discharge petition. The White House said passing the Massey discharge petition is a hostile act. Wow. That's a lot of distraction and deflection and misinformation. Wait, passing a discharge petition to release the Epstein files, the White House said would be a hostile act. Nope, we have no questions about that. But why? Why is it that we're spending so much political capital to keep this list from coming out? You think the list should come out? You think we should know the people who dealt with Mr. Epstein, Mr. Farage?
I thought I was coming to a hearing on free speech, not process.
Oh, well, listen, but here's the
And
good...
That sounds like you're discussing process.
No. Do you think the list should come out?
I have no opinion on it. I don't know at all.
So we have victims that were sexually abused by potentially people in power, and we don't know who's on the list.
I'm very happy.
Hold on, Mr. Farage. We don't know who's on the list. We don't know who's on the list. We don't know if the president is or is not. I'm not going to say he is or isn't. I'm just going to say these are weird behaviors. We don't know that there aren't other people in Congress that are on the list, right? We have no idea. Do you think the list should come out? You think people in power should be held to account for these victims who have been sexually abused and assaulted? You think the list should come out?
I think that I'm very happy to come to a different hearing where you talk about legal process.
Okay.
But today,
Will the gentleman yield for a quick question?
Today we'll stick to
Were
free
you
speech.
aware that he has already called for the Epstein file to be released? It has been reported that he has called for it to be released.
Oh yeah, right here, just to refresh your memory.
Yeah, but
I happen to have this.
But that's not
How
what
random.
But that is not. Look, you can ask me if you like about
Do you agree
social
with
security
yourself?
policy.
Do you agree with yourself?
We are here to discuss free speech.
Hold on, it's awkward for your lunch after this? Do you agree with yourself?
No, it isn't at all.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm just curious. This committee has jurisdiction over the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
Why have we allowed Comer to cover this up for the last couple of months?
As I said,
why is this committee not
I
taking
said 6 weeks
jurisdiction?
ago that we will have the FBI director in, we will have the attorney general in, and we are doing that in 2 weeks. You can ask you can go through that whole list. That whole list, you can do whatever you want to do with. I got lots of questions for the FBI director, including the whistleblower who came forward and told him that Adam Schiff leaked classified information. I want to ask him about that as well as the issues you all want to ask him about. That's why he's coming, so we can ask all these questions and follow the process, as Mr. Farage just talked about.
Mr.
The
Chairman,
gentleman from Virginia.
unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent?
I'd like to enter the political article into the record that Mr. Farage said the Epstein file should be released.
Without objection. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
I thank the chairman. I want to talk about censorship tools that are being used by Europe and protectionist measures that have major consequences for U.S. companies and free expression worldwide. I'm glad to have you all here to get your views on those issues. Mr. Farage, you've called the Online Safety Act a borderline dystopian censorship regime, and many agree, including myself, that the law badly overreaches. One of the most serious criticisms is that it empowers Ofcom to undermine encryption and open the door to not just government surveillance of posts online and public statements, but private messages, raising alarms not just in the UK, but beyond UK borders. Vice President J.D. Vance has warned this could threaten Americans' privacy as well. Do you recognize that this is not just a domestic issue for the UK, but a global one? And if you become Prime Minister, what assurances would you give allies that the UK will not undermine end-to-end privacy standards?
You have my absolute word that a reform government will repeal the Online Safety Act and will go right back, actually, to legislation back to 2010, under which these whole concepts of hate speech have begun to be interpreted in UK law, and we will do that. Do we want to protect kids? This is the big question. Yes, we do. We need to find means, we need to find ways. I half suggested earlier that hardware could be part of the solution, but yes, we want to protect, to encourage and let free speech flourish.
You've said Reform UK has access to some of the best tech minds to design alternatives. How do you propose to balance protecting children without scanning private messages or weakening encryption?
I think, well, as I said, look, I don't have all the answers to this, but the British Prime Minister says he has got the answers to this. Well, if it's about protecting kids, why does the legislation give Ofcom the most extraordinary and frankly arbitrary powers? And why is there the establishment under the Act of an elite police force unit to monitor what is said online. So, you know, it's far better to be honest and say we don't have the perfect solutions than to pretend we have with legislation that is a sledgehammer that misses the nut.
Thank you. Mr. Price, the EU's Digital Services Act imposes liability for so-called systemic risks. How does that chill religious or political speech, and do you see conflicts with First Amendment principles?
Yeah, that's correct. The systemic risk provision, I think, constitutes a form of content moderation that they're misrepresenting, frankly, in their letters to you. Where the systemic risk provisions talk about, in fact, damage to what they call civil discourse. And we've already seen prosecutions, including clients of ours, who have been prosecuted for, among other things, praying silently, discussing the differences between Christianity and Islam, tweeting a verse from the Bible. So if these constitute systemic risks to civil discourse, the EU has the power in terms of this content moderation provision to step in.
Damage to civil discourse seems a little broad, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Mr. Reid, the EU's Digital Markets Act and the UK's Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act are sold as pro-competition, but don't compliance costs just burden small app developers?
Absolutely. The problem is that it's interesting as you talked about how do you do a better job. You asked how do we do a better job to protect children. One of the ways we do it is by empowering parents to be good parents. And one of our deepest concerns is by removing some of the capability of the platforms to curate and provide information to parents about what applications do through a clear, forward interface that they see every day that's useful. It makes it harder to parent, harder to know what apps are on your kid's device, and harder for you to control it. So we absolutely see that not only are there problems with it on encryption, which we agree with you 100%, but we also think it weakens our ability as parents to be in charge of the devices our children are using.
Yeah, these rules don't help parents, consumers, if you will. They just shift power from platforms and from parents and from consumers to regulators, correct?
Correct.
Do these regimes create a level playing field for U.S. firms, or do they advantage European competitors at the expense of American innovation?
Well, the original thought behind the DMA was that Europe had not been successful in creating their own industry, as was alluded to by several other members of Congress, and Congressman Correa noted it as well. Europe's economic potential has slowed while the United States has grown incredibly. We've gone from almost equal in 2008 to a 50% increase in the size of the US economy between 2008 and now. And we think a lot of it comes from the small technology companies that have been creating amazing devices, amazing products, amazing applications that you're all using. And we are disappointed that, that there aren't the same opportunities for the US, for our EU members.
Thanks, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, for years, political extremists, including some of our colleagues, have claimed without evidence that so-called conservative speech is being canceled. But the speech at issue is not conservative political speech. It's hate speech, including incitement to violence, threats and harassments of particular people or groups, and lies about almost everything from election results to health care. And there's nothing conservative about any of that. So today's hearing appears to be one more attempt by these extremists to claim victimhood, promote falsehoods, and normalize radical ideas, all while attacking others. Today, our Republican colleagues claim that our European allies pose the biggest threat to Americans' free speech today. Seriously? There's an all-out assault on the First Amendment in the US, but it's coming from inside the House, the White House, the executive branch of our own country. For the past 8 months, our Republican colleagues have done nothing but cheer on the administration's un-American attacks. Because the truth is, they're all for free speech, but only if it's the speech they agree with. I'd say if you really want to talk about censorship, let's talk about how this administration, with the support of our MAGA colleagues, has tried to strangle speech and ideas that it doesn't agree with when that speech comes from the free press, college campuses, law firms and judges, library books, the Smithsonian museums, responsible investors, scientists, dedicated employees with deep expertise, and more. We've seen this White House use executive orders, threats and intimidation, illegal withholding of federal funding, raids by masked and armed police, and even sending military troops onto American streets to shut down opposition to this administration's policies. Professor Kaye, you are an internationally recognized expert on freedom of expression and have studied the growing assault on free speech and civil society around the world. In your testimony, you said that the situation in the U.S. raises serious alarms. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, well, thank you for the question. Everything that you just mentioned is alarming. The assaults on the press, on universities, on public protest, all of those things, I think, are the kinds of things that historically the United States has fought against. So all of those things are very problematic. And I think that one way to think about them, perhaps, and it's useful in this committee, actually, in the context of this committee, is to think of those things that the Trump administration is doing as a contrast to something like the DSA, right? So the DSA sees a problem, which I think is a problem shared or perceived on both sides of the aisle, which is massive platform power and also the kinds of content that you alluded to. But the DSA doesn't create any new rules that allow either the European Commission or countries to censor. It is a transparency regime. It's a risk assessment regime. It's actually researcher access. It's actually a tool to give us information about what's happening online. That's in just sharp contrast to the kind of issues that we're seeing in this country, which are very much focused on criticism and content.
Yeah, I think my colleague, Ms. Jayapal, talked about the fact that we had a very robust investigation of big tech in prior Congresses, which has kind of been shut down by a new alliance between big tech and the Republican Party. But it is about dealing with the real issues and the very real power that these big tech platforms have and trying to provide tools for ordinary citizens to fight back against disinformation or harmful content. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about one tool that the DSA offers, it's this assurance that individuals will be able to challenge, to appeal content moderation decisions. That is not something that is allowed or mandated by law in the United States. One other thing just to mention in this connection, I think Mr. Farage mentioned, and it's really just to highlight how hard some of these questions might be. Mr. Farage has suggested the possibility that hardware could be part of a solution to deal with children's access to harmful information. I think there's something possibly there, but it's another form of censorship. I think we should just recognize that restrictions are on the table in the United States, in the UK, elsewhere. I think the Europeans have adopted an approach that makes quite a bit of sense.
Trying to get to as many members as possible. The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized. Mr. Farage has to leave in a few minutes, so we want to get as many members as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just before I begin, to my friend, he's not here now, Mr. Moskowitz from Florida, there's kind of an old trick in debating. When you're losing the debate on the issue, you change the issue. This is not about Epstein. It has nothing to do with that. And as the chairman so correctly said, the Attorney General is going to be here, the FBI Director is going to be here, and we can talk about it till the cows come home. Second thing is, I believe it was you, Mr. Farage, that said COVID changed our world. And in many ways, more than just a biological disease, what it did to us psychologically, governmentally, philosophically was really bad. And we're still not out of it yet because of what happened then. We're losing our freedoms. We are losing our freedoms. And it's not because of an American Congress. It's not because of American courts. It's not because of American Republicans. And I'm going to even say it's not because of American Democrats. It is due to bureaucrats in Brussels and in London, and in other places as well. It's wrong. It's un-American. I am unabashedly, and I think we all are here, hopefully, pro-American. We should be protecting our citizens. Instead, we're watching foreign bureaucrats come to our country and try to force United States companies to censor humor, satire, and news they don't like. It's backwards, it's bizarre, it's perverse, and it's weird. That's what we would call it in New Jersey. It's just weird, and it's not good. It's the opposite of everything that the United States of America fought for and stands for. And it's a globalist mindset. You know, we can all talk about the issues, but I'm going to keep talking about globalism versus American exceptionalism and individuality. I believe very much, sincerely, that the whole battle that's going on now with the right and the left, what's happening in Great Britain, what's happening around the world, what's happening in the United States, is very much that argument. Individuality, and in our case here in the States, Americanism, exceptionalism, or is it globalism? And like the EU's Digital Service Act and the UK's Online Safety Act are the pinnacle examples, and they are, of how upside down things have gotten in the effort to globalize our society. And that is the ultimate showdown. It is resulting in our losing of our freedom, losing our influence, and the only winner here are some countries in Europe, Russia, China, and others. Europe is spending their time attacking American tech companies, dictating how our platforms operate, how our technology operates, and punishing people for exhibiting free speech. The European model, I'm sorry if I offend anyone, but it is wrong. We fought a revolution to defend ourselves. Men and women pledged their lives, their treasure, their sacred honor, so that they wouldn't have to go through this. And we never thought that Americans would be stripped of that. That's why this moment is so serious. It's more serious than most Americans and people realize right now. And you know, for generations, we thought if we were ever attacked, it was going to be a nuclear holocaust. We thought it was going to be the domino theory. We thought it was going to be world wars. We thought it was so many things. I maintain it's this. If we lose our First Amendment rights and our freedom of speech, we have lost everything and nothing else matters. And internet technology is being used as a vehicle to make this happen. So I have a question for Mr. Farage and Mr. Price. This hearing is really good, and I'm sure we're going to have some other hearings. But more than hearings and talking about it, what is it tangibly, this is a hard question, that we can do to stop it? What is it? Mr. Farage, I'll start with you.
The debate we've had here, I mean, nobody here from any side of the debate has told me that the Online Safety Act is a wonderful piece of legislation. You know, right across the spectrum here, you're having your own internal debates about free speech in America, right, healthy, and what this committee is for. I want to make this argument. Yeah, I know these companies are very big and very powerful, many of the tech firms, but, you know, governments talk to each other, yeah? And it needs the American administration and businesses to have an honest conversation. Brussels, you won't get a hearing. They are fundamentally anti-American, frankly, and I was there for 20 years. I saw it. I do think there is a conversation to be had with the British government about the shape of their legislation and the impact it can have on American individuals, their liberty, and American companies. So I am calling for, as a result of what's happened, it's clearly got, the legislation's clearly doing the wrong thing. I think it is cause for proper intergovernmental debate.
I hope that we have it. And by the way, we have censorship in America. Watch ABC, NBC, and CBS. I'm at the meetings. I'm at a discussion. I see and hear what happens. I watch, my wife has Channel 6 on, which drives me nuts at home, and it has nothing to do with the damn stuff that actually happened. And that's the truth. We have it already, and I pray to God we don't lose America. Mr. Chairman, indulgence, and I'll shut up. Mr. Price didn't get a chance.
Quickly. Yes, sir. You talked about putting pressure on, and I agree that Brussels is a cold house for free speech. But a lot of the regulations actually happening in my own country, in Ireland, in Dublin, where a lot of the tech companies are headquartered, their European headquarters. And it's the Irish Media Commission, or Commission na Meán in the Irish language, which is the ground zero, really, for a lot of this regulation. And here's where I think the US can do a lot, because there's strong bilateral relationships between Ireland and the United States, is to put pressure on the Irish government to stop the bullying of tech companies. And already X is in the Irish Supreme Court soon against the Irish Media Commissioner. So they're already starting the crackdown. So I would hope that you use your good offices here to put pressure on the Irish.
Mr.
Chairman, I have a point of parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman is recognized.
Why is the witness leaving this hearing early, and certainly without?
He has an engagement he told us about. This is not unusual. It's happened before under Democrat leadership of the committee, under Republican leadership of the committee. We're trying to get through as many people as we can. You've had many of your witnesses who did not ask Mr. Farage a question. Many of your colleagues, if you could have coordinated with them, you didn't go in order. We didn't necessarily go in order because we wanted to get as many people up front asking Mr. Farage questions.
Could we ask him if he would be willing to stay for?
It's totally up to the witness, but if the witness has to go somewhere, I understand. We were glad that he came. We were glad that we had a chance to visit with him in Europe. So you could have went on that trip and had a chance to interact with him.
I wasn't invited, but next time.
Oh, you were definitely invited. Everyone was invited from the Democrat side. The whole committee was invited. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Georgia for questions. And Mr. Farage, if you can stay longer, we would definitely welcome that.
When I chaired this event in the Palace of Westminster, we had an hour for it because time was very tight, and that was perhaps the source of a slight disagreement Mr. Raskin and I had.
A little bit of confusion on that.
We would have given this.
Each side got an hour, but the whole thing was limited to an hour. And then your side went, and then you called it off.
I was given the instructions. This we've given 3 hours, and I apologize, but no, I can't stay longer.
Okay.
I could send the Constitution down to the White House for the president to read it.
The gentleman is not recognized. The gentlelady from Georgia has 5 minutes to ask her questions while Mr. Farage is still here, and then he will leave when he has to leave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today. Our First Amendment rights, as you can see, are definitely under attack. Words are very powerful tools, as you've heard them being used here in this hearing, and this administration has gone out of their way to retaliate against our students, news agencies, and others who express views that don't align with their extreme agenda. By using lawsuits, eliminating funding, and even going so far as to send out a memo with a list of restricted words that can't even be used. The actions of this administration have been ruled against in court time and time again by judges from both parties on a basis of abusing our constitutional rights. From freezing funding for colleges because they do not bend to this administration's will, to removing programs that are designed to expand student understanding and access in education, which I'd like to add, increases future opportunities for our Republican constituents as well, and using federal investigation powers to retaliate. We are watching the First Amendment be manipulated in ways that this nation hoped that they would never see. Hear it from the judges who have ruled against government bullies who attempt to violate the rights of the American people. U.S. District Judge Suknanim found First Amendment violations in the government investigation into media matters, which she stated is likely to succeed in its claim that the FTC was using this investigation as a retaliation against the watchdog group for claims against a prominent Trump supporter. A clear violation of First Amendment protections, and the cases, they just go on and on and on. U.S. District Judge McFadden, a Trump appointee, ordered that the Associated Press's access to the White House press be reinstated, ruling that denying their access because of differing viewpoints was a clear violation of the First Amendment. If the majority wants to talk about attacks on the First Amendment in other parts of the world, they need to start right here in our administration. The Constitution is the foundation of this country. It is not meant to be trampled on for political or for business advantage. When you love something, you want to protect it, and you want to do what's best for it. You want to improve it. This means people will speak out and disagree on actions taken in their country and offer critiques of our leaders and, yes, the politicians. That's a constitutionally protected right. If the First Amendment is our guardrail, then this administration is truly trying to push us off the road. This government should be strong enough to accept any criticism without violating people's rights and offending the man in the White House. Professor Kay, I have a question, just one question for you. Based on what you've seen since this January, if our colleagues in the majority continue to pretend that our First Amendment rights are not under attack here at home. What could this mean for our country within the next 3 years?
Thank you for that question. I think that as we look at the current moment and the current situation for our media, for our universities, for people's access to information generally, particularly access to health information, I think it portends really very problematic and dark days ahead. Will we be able to have access to information that makes us informed parents or informed citizens, able to make voting decisions? I think that's the kind of future that we should expect if we don't recognize this situation. And I think that the tenor of the conversation could at least recognize that there are violations of fundamental rights to freedom of expression by this government right now. At least recognize it. I know that Democrats in the last 5 years called out the Biden administration from time to time when it did things that it thought was inconsistent with free speech values. I think having that kind of honest discussion and then some real constraint is where the committee should be heading.
Thank you so much. I encourage everyone that sees nothing wrong with this administration's retaliatory attacks on expressions of our First Amendment to consider just how much you are willing to give up to appease this man in the White House. At this time, I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to our ranking member.
There's no time left to yield. I think the gentlelady yields back. I do have to run to another commitment. I will be back in 20 minutes. We will have Mr. Knott take over as chair. Mr. Farage, if you have to leave, I look forward to visiting with you sometime later, hopefully.
I do, but thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony.
Could I just ask you to stay for one more, Mr. Farage?
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Farage, I enjoyed Milwaukee at the Harley-Davidson plant with you. That was a great evening. So, question for Mr. Price or Mr. Farage. One requirement for speech to be censored as a false communication offense under the OSA is that speech must cause non-trivial psychological or physical harm. What is non-trivial psychological harm?
I honestly don't know. And that's the problem with this legislation. It's so open-ended, it could mean anything. It leaves this entirely in the hands of local police forces to make their decisions. And the other disturbing element of this is that much within this act can be changed on a whim by a government minister, or at the other end, it can be interpreted by Ofcom in ways that it sees fit. You know, this is not good legislation. It's totally open-ended. It could literally mean whatever you want it to mean.
And local law enforcement, I guess, can make that decision on who they decide to prosecute and who they do not. Have we seen it tending one way or the other? I know we've talked about a couple of cases in here. Are there certain people being targeted, you think, with OSA?
Well, that's the fear, isn't it? The fear is that certain communities will be acted upon more harshly than other communities. That creates the impression of a two-tier country. That then breaks down trust in law and order, the democratic system, and everything else. I thought what was interesting overnight was that the boss, Sir Mark Rowley, the boss of the Metropolitan Police, has said, look, we arrested this guy at Heathrow because we had to under the law, but they've thrown it back to the government to say, come on, can you just define more clearly what you want this legislation to mean? And that's why I think it's rotten legislation. It impacts us in ways that we can't yet foresee. It impacts potentially Americans and American businesses, and it needs to be gotten rid of, and we need to start again.
So, Mr. Price, talking about affecting American businesses, I guess Europe's 440 million people, the U.S. is 300 million people. How do these companies, what do you see down the road for these platforms, these social media platforms, these companies that feel like they have to try and comply if they're going to do business in Europe? If, in fact, we don't repeal this OSA thing, which I hope Mr. Farage is able to do that with his leadership at some point in the near future. So how does this play out for our companies, Mr. Price, and for free speech in Europe in general?
Well, on the corporate side, they're facing a really complicated piece of legislation, and as Mr. Farage outlined, with the provisions that are confusing in the Online Safety Act in the United Kingdom, there are similarly extremely confusing provisions in the Digital Services Act. So the mindset has to be one normally of compliance. One company has stood up to this whole regime and is challenging it at every level, and that's X. I hope others join and do the same, because the European Commission, though, really has been quite threatening. You'll recall the Thierry Breton letter, of course, about the Elon Musk's interview with then candidate President Trump. And you'll also see that other members of the Commission have made threatening remarks against companies as well on these so-called voluntary codes of conduct. When X and Google left one of the codes of conduct, a European commissioner said, well, of course they are voluntary, but we note that you've left them and we'll still hold you on the obligations. And you have Thierry Breton saying as well, you can run, but you can't hide if you leave the codes of conduct. So the whole thing is designed to force compliance, and the hammer that they have, of course, is these enormous crippling fines.
It's like 10% on global revenue, if I understand correctly. So for some of these companies, that's a pretty tremendous fine.
Absolutely, yeah, of turnover.
And I guess, could you, as we're looking through this, it's like almost like people could claim that they were offended or hurt. You hurt their feelings, and then all of a sudden you're a target of this investigation. Is that right, Mr. Farage? Is that kind of?
Yes, and frankly, under free speech, we should be allowed to cause offence.
And that
I should be able
quite
to
often,
offend
right?
you, you should be able to offend me, and provided we know what the limits are, and the limits I think we fully understand of incitement, for example, then we have to get back to, you know, a much freer way of living. And if people say rude things and we don't like them, well, we just ignore them and get on
Like
with our
today when
lives.
you were accused of Russian collusion, I guess. That was pretty offensive.
Well, I remember the Russia hoax very, very well. We had shades of it earlier on this morning, but,
That's what I was thinking.
but not much more than that, I'm pleased to say.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. And we're going to have to go, Mr. Chairman, but thank you very much.
Mr.
indeed.
Farage, you can blame
Mr.
it on
Farage.
me. One more. Oh, you're avoiding me.
Mr. Farage, thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
I'm sorry to see you leave, Mr. Farage. I actually had much that we agree upon and was looking forward to your testimony because it's very nice and refreshing to hear from my GOP colleagues that they are worried about authoritarianism. Mr. Biggs and Mr. McClintock both said that earlier. And I imagine, given what's going on in this country, when the president is sending the military into American cities, is weaponizing the Department of Justice to investigate his enemies, requiring loyalty oaths from all federal workers at risk of otherwise being fired, the list goes on and on. It is reassuring to hear that the Republicans who have remained stone silent about Trump's authoritarian takeover of our government here are actually concerned about authoritarianism. And I found it really heartening that Mr. Van Drew said, and I quote, "If we lose our First Amendment rights, we lose everything." Now, in his opening statement, Mr. Farage said, quote, "When the government starts regulating speech, it is rarely those that agree with the government who find themselves in court." And Mr. Farage, I'll ask you the question, is that similar to your concern about suppressing speech that disagrees with the government? Oh, Mr. Farage has left. Well, Mr. Raskin, I will then maybe just you can stand in for Mr. Farage for a minute here. I know you are a champion of free speech. I'm not sure it's the same free speech that Mr. Farage is supporting, but if this concern about the government regulating speech is because it is rarely those that agree with the government who find themselves in court, then you would think that Mr. Farage and all of our Republican colleagues would be very, very concerned if an administration here in the United States was investigating criminally individuals who made the colossal mistake of speaking out against the president. That would be a clear violation of Mr. Farage's principle. Is that right?
He was talking about the importance of political dissent. And this is a test, Mr. Goldman, I think, of our constitutional patriotism. To what extent are we willing to speak up for people who are the targets of government repression, even if we don't agree with what they're saying? A great example of that is our colleague, Congresswoman
Celtic
MacGyver
games.
from New Jersey. I would hope
You nailed it.
that in a comparable circumstance, I would stand up for a Republican colleague who tries to exercise his or her oversight rights by going to a government facility
The level of
on a
projection.
prearranged visit and then gets caught up in the chaos and confusion outside, and they want to send her to jail for 30 years. I did stand up for our colleague from New York, I'm spacing his name.
Mr. Santos.
Mr. Santos,
Friend.
because they wanted to expel him without his having a conviction or an ethics process. And I said that wasn't fair. So I think I passed a micro test there. I would hope some of our colleagues would say, no, don't prosecute our colleagues just for doing their jobs.
Well, let's talk about that, because that is exactly what this Department of Justice is doing. Recently, we heard publicly, which would ordinarily never happen, the Department of Justice does not say publicly, they don't confirm that there are any investigations of anyone until there's an indictment, because that person or those individuals can't defend themselves. But now we know that Senator Adam Schiff, who led the first impeachment of Donald Trump, is under investigation by the Department of Justice. New York State Attorney General Letitia James, who filed a lawsuit against Donald Trump and his business, she is now under investigation. Miles Taylor, who literally did the only thing that he did was write an op-ed and a book criticizing the President of the United States, he is under criminal investigation. Chris Krebs, whose offense, I think, was to say that the 2020 election was the most secure ever, he is under investigation. John Bolton, who has criticized the president, gets his house raided. Lisa Cook, the Fed governor, is now under investigation for mortgage fraud, I guess because she doesn't want to lower rates. The degree to which this government is suppressing speech that simply opposes the president's views should make Mr. Farage and every single one of my Republican colleagues speak out in favor of the First Amendment, and yet we have heard nothing. There is still time, my friends, and I yield back.
Thank you, sir. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming.
Benjamin Franklin said over 270 years ago, freedom of speech is a principal pillar of a free government. When this support is taken away, the constitution of a free society is dissolved and tyranny is erected on its ruins. An evil magistrate entrusted with power to punish for words would be armed with a weapon the most destructive and terrible. Under pretense of pruning off the exuberant branches, he would be apt to destroy the tree. Mr. Farage talked in his opening statement that noted that Europe's regulatory regime risks exporting restrictive standards that could violate Americans' constitutional rights. So I'd like to expose that and discuss that a little bit further. He noted that the oh-so-benignly titled Online Safety Act exemplified this regulatory model. The OSA is marketed as a measure to protect children online, but it is clearly being used as a means to actually impose government-backed censorship, especially speech which is critical of government policy. As an egregious example, we have learned that the OSA has been used against Katie Lamb, MP for Weald of Kent, to block videos of her speeches made in Parliament critical of the fallout from the country's immigration policies. Mr. Price, are you familiar with the circumstance where actual speeches in Parliament or other public figures, their speeches are being censored by the government under this claim of protecting minors or protecting people from hearing this speech?
I'm familiar with censorship of public protests that's already happened in the United Kingdom. The Online Safety Act has placed blocks on those to protect children. That's the claim, but it has prevented adults from accessing it as well.
So the Times has also reported that using the Communications Act of 2003 and the Malicious Communications Act of 1988, there have been 37 police forces have made over 12,000 arrests in 2023 alone, which is the equivalent of 33 a day, all in relation to social media posts. Are you familiar with that information, Mr. Price?
I am, yes.
Okay. In July, the House of Commons Science, Innovation, and Technology Committee released a report indicating that the OSA was merely a first step, is the way that they have described this. In other words, they are planning to do even more to address what they describe as online harm. Have you heard that as well?
I have, yes.
Well, and I think that there's something that just happened this week, and a few of the members have referenced it, but it involved the Irish comedian and writer Graham Linehan, who was arrested in Britain, apparently for social media posts about transgender issues. Did you hear of this circumstance?
Yes, I did. I know Graham personally.
Okay, and according to his Substack article, the trouble actually began when he was in America. He was at the airport in Arizona seeking to fly back to Europe. Was told that he did not have a seat, was put on a later flight, and when he arrived at Heathrow, he was met by 5 armed police officers. Are police officers in England typically armed?
They're not, no.
So did you find it strange that he would be met by 5 armed police officers?
At airports, counterterrorism police are usually armed, and or there's a special wing of the Metropolitan Police that has armed support unit.
So is he considered a terrorist?
I'm not clear what provision he was arrested under of legislation, but there is a power in the Terrorism Act to arrest people at airports and seize their devices.
Sure. Was he identified as a terrorist because of his online posts?
It's not clear yet if he was arrested under that provision, but it has very wide-ranging powers, and it is used on occasion to detain people at ports.
Okay, I understand that, and that probably is more of a frightening answer than I expected, which is that they've used the power that is typically reserved for terrorists or people who are of grave risk to the country to arrest Mr. Linehan at the airport because of his Twitter posts. Is that right?
It's not clear if they use it yet, but that is a power that they frequently, that is used to seize people's devices at airports.
Can you describe more of what happened with this incident involving Mr. Linehan? Do you have the familiarity with the facts?
I've read his statement, yes.
Okay, and could you please explain what happened?
It appears that he was detained on arrival in Heathrow and then arrested, searched, subjected to a long series of questions, most of which revolved around his beliefs on gender ideology and transgender issues. Some of the questions from the police, according to Mr. Linehan, were extremely ideological in nature, and they talked about people who are assigned a gender at birth, which, as he pointed out himself, is activist language that the police should not be using.
So he also claims that his bail conditions one of the conditions was that he could no longer use X. Is this a tactic you have seen or heard of being used before?
Yes, we've seen extraordinary bail conditions, even placed on clients of our own. We had a client, Pastor Dia Moodley, who was given a bail condition that he was not allowed to preach about the differences between Christianity and Islam on the basis of that he would be bailed. So we have seen bizarre and wide-ranging bail conditions set on people before under speech offenses.
Time's expired.
Okay, thank you.
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from North Carolina.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony and for your patience. It's been a long hearing. I think it's very timely that we're discussing threats to freedom of speech and innovation in this committee. I do wish we were talking about what's going on in this country right now, but I don't always get what I wish for. Freedom of speech in this country is under threat. There is no question about it. And we haven't talked about this much, so I'm going to focus on it. The essential American ideal of innovation is also under threat, and it's enshrined in our Constitution, and it's being ignored. The gravest threats to speech and innovation are coming not from our democratic European allies, but from the authoritarian and unconstitutional actions of the Trump administration. The Trump administration has embarked on a coordinated crackdown of speech on universities across the country. I represent more than 5 universities in the Research Triangle area. I've seen it. The administration illegally froze billions of dollars in federal research grants, affecting not just people's health and safety, which is what they were for in the first place, but the economies of places like North Carolina. They forced the resignation of university presidents they don't like, and they threatened to strip universities of patents for discoveries made in their labs. Unprecedented. This administration has also refused to restore these important grants, which fund research for everything from breast cancer to infant mortality, unless the schools allow the government to exert control over faculty hiring, academic programs, and student admissions. Professor Kaye, how have the Trump administration's attacks on our nation's preeminent research universities harmed the ability to innovate?
I think that's an excellent question. and we've seen it across the board, these attacks on universities. And if we think about universities, and there is a connection here to freedom of speech, if we think of our universities as the principal engine for the generation of knowledge and the generation of ideas, basically innovation in our country, the administration is going after them in all the ways that you described. And it goes after them not only by withholding grants that have already been awarded, it's also going after them in the context of seeking to shape what the research is, what's actually being taught in the classroom. Those are, I think, very significant interferences with the potential for innovation in our country.
Well, thank you for that. And now to get to the tech issues, because that's kind of underlying what's going on. This hearing is supposed to be about Europe's threat to big tech companies, but I'd like you to speak about the threat of big tech companies and the AI models that they're creating on intellectual property rights, many of which are protected more strongly in Europe than they are here. How have AI models that scrape everything that they can, whether copyrighted or not, impacted innovation and even our newspapers, which are having to sue for the copyright for the content that they create?
Well, I think this is as you know, a pretty complicated area. But I would highlight, just to bring it to European regulation for a moment, whereas the United States has not really gone very far down the path of legislating in this area and finding ways to boost AI's potential for democratic and freedom of expression purposes, Europe has actually adopted an AI Act, which, again, we might not agree with all of its particulars, but it's aiming to harness the power of AI for democratic purposes and to ensure that AI doesn't have this negative impact on fundamental rights. I think that's an approach that we can learn from, actually, and that we haven't so far.
And I want to just, because I know I only have a second left, I really want to give a lot of credit to Congressman Issa, because he has been having excellent hearings on this very issue, but unfortunately, the larger Judiciary Committee has taken no action. And so I would encourage the larger Judiciary Committee to follow Congressman Issa's lead about protecting our creators. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Ross. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here to talk about ongoing concerns with European censorship, British censorship, and its effect on American speech or broader free speech principles that hurt certainly citizens, but American companies, both domestically and abroad. What I'm hearing today, at least from the witnesses, is rather alarming. This Orwellian in nature approach that Europe has taken, the hostility to free speech, to satire, to maybe speech that you disagree with. And I want to talk about that as it pertains to the UK, the EU, and certainly the US. Mr. Price, Prime Minister Starmer said that the UK does not have a free speech problem. Do you agree with that statement?
No, I do not.
In what ways do you disagree with the Prime Minister?
We have seen numerous prosecutions in the United Kingdom for totally non-violent speech. We have clients, my own organization is acting for, who have been arrested for silently praying, for offering consensual conversations, for preaching about the gospel. And I can go on. There are numerous and numerous examples.
12,183 prosecutions, I think, is at least what I've read. Does that sound about accurate to you?
That sounds accurate.
Which is a 50% increase from pre-pandemic levels. What does that tell you about maybe the focus of the British government as it pertains to speech right now?
Sadly, it shows that the United Kingdom, just like the rest of Europe, has entered a spiral of censorship, and it's getting worse. And it's gotten to the point where even our oldest and closest ally, the United States, has had to intervene and point that out. And as I said on numerous occasions, I'm extremely grateful to all of you for doing that. But the problem, frankly, is being now compounded and set in stone by things like the DSA from the European Union and the Online Safety Act in the United Kingdom.
Well, let's talk about the Online Safety Act for a second. I mean, I think it maybe is intended to protect children, and I think everyone lauds that. Mr. Farage talked about that nobody, right or left, wants their child exposed to bad content online. But it's been talked about, and you've seen this in your practice, used as a weapon to target speech that maybe the government finds uncomfortable or disagrees with. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We've seen, for example, Section 62, which is designed to protect children, being used to censor videos of protests near asylum centres. And so once you reach a point where content is restricted on the basis that it is political, we're moving well out of any kind of zone of protecting children into essentially censorship.
Right, so at least in the case of the comedian, the Irish comedian that was recently arrested, you know, I was not aware of his content before and looked at it, and it seemed to be satirical in nature or maybe hyperbolic and not necessarily to be treated literally. Is that your interpretation of that too?
Yes, in fact, I told Graham Linehan when I was growing up I wasn't allowed to watch his comedy on TV. Father Ted was the show that he's probably most famous for. So what I would say is he's an excellent satirist, and he's in the long tradition of Irish satire, starting with Jonathan Swift, really, and all the way up to today.
Isn't that part of like British society, though? Is like satire is embedded in the culture. Like you've embraced this for hundreds of years, right?
Yeah, I would just add Irish and British.
Irish and British, excuse me.
Yes. Yeah, very much so, yeah. And it's the concept, really. I think we haven't seen political extremism in the British Isles in the way that we did in Europe, because we have a healthy way of kind of laughing at and poking fun at our leadership. And I think whether it's cartoons about the king in the 1800s all the way up to Father Ted and Graham Linehan's work today, that's a great tradition.
Isn't there growing frustration with the Irish people, the British people, maybe broader European cultures, that the government is more focused on speech than it is, say, the migrant crimes that are happening right under their noses? I mean, that seems to be, from my view across the pond, that particularly the British people, they're fed up with the non-enforcement of immigration laws at the expense, or maybe because, in large part, they're focused on what people are saying online. Do you share that?
I completely agree with that, and this is the discussion I had with Representative Raskin in London. This is about shutting down growing discontent in Europe with the decisions that our political elites have made. And we've reached a crisis point where it's no longer possible to conceal the level of public anger. And I think these censorship maneuvers are an act of desperation, and they won't work.
Thank you for that. And radically shifting to Mr. Reed for a second, in a different approach. In the app industry, does the DMA incentivize Chinese copycat companies to flood the market? And if so, how does that impact American companies in European markets? And what are the associated data privacy implications of that?
You may finish.
Being aware of the time, yes. The problem is Article 6, Section 4.
You have unlimited time. Pay no attention to the chairman.
I always pay attention to the chair and the ranking member. The easy idea is Article 6, Section 4, Article 6, Section 7, and even 10. Part of the problem is they basically have must-carry provisions. And what that does is open the door. Part of what small businesses have benefited the most from the existence of these platforms, again, as I said, this isn't a love affair, it's a business relationship. They opened the door to customers, and the customers trust what they're buying on the platform. Article 6, Section 4, and Section 7 really say they must put on anyone's product. And of course, the most classic example of that, the first mover under the new DMA was Pornhub, which Apple had decided they didn't want porn apps on their app store. And the first one out of the gate to say incorrectly, they claimed it was an Apple-approved app, which once again leads to confusion and breaks down trust. That was out of the gate the first app. And so from my members' perspective, their concern is, hey, I want to be sold at the store that people feel comfortable buying at. And the more you degrade the quality of experience and the more you degrade or allow that to be broader, we run into a problem. Thank you. I'm sorry for the time.
Mr. Chairman, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Apparently, the whereabouts of our missing witness have been ascertained. He's appearing on GB News, which I guess is the network he works for outside of the Rayburn building. I just wonder if it would be consistent with the rules and the practice of our committee for us to send someone to invite him to come back, because I think we have 5 or 6 members who haven't questioned yet. Would that be all right if we sent someone to go alert him that there's still members waiting to do their questioning, just out of courtesy and respect for our colleagues?
Well, the chair will make note that the witness has appeared voluntarily, he has left voluntarily, but in terms of going and asking him to come back, no objection there.
Okay, if we could do it, if we could find him, and I'd like to submit for the record this clip from GB News: British free speech under threat. Nigel Farage says UK is an authoritarian state like North Korea.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Gentleman yield? Yes, sir. The chair recognizes the representative from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I spent my August traveling around my state listening to Vermonters tell me what was on their minds, and there was one constant thread, and that was fear and concern for young people, for their safety, for their future. And parents kept asking me, will my kids ever be able to afford a house in this economy? Is it going to be safe for my kid to go to school? And are my kids safe online? Over and over again. And I want to tell you about one conversation I had with a high school student in Vermont who said to me, we all know that social media on our phones is hurting us. And in some instances, it's literally killing us. And what he wanted to say is, what are you doing about it? What are you doing about it? And I have to ask myself the same question, because I'm a parent, I'm a former teacher, I'm now a member of Congress, and what are we actually doing to solve the problem, to stand up for our kids? And it's clear we need real attention on this. We need to focus our attention, and we do need to regulate corporations behind these problems. And we need real public oversight, yes, over the gun makers, yes, over financial speculators, but also big tech. Because polls show across the country, Americans overwhelmingly want us to take action on the harms that are hurting their kids. And yet here we are, first hearing back, we're not talking about the AI platforms that are leading kids to self-harm. We're not talking about the algorithms profiting off of teens' eating disorders. We're not working together to hold big tech accountable. No, we're here talking about how other countries are being too mean to big tech. It's gross. Professor Kay, thanks for being here. Can you briefly describe how the EU's Digital Services Act regulates social media content for children?
So the DSA is a very big piece of legislation, a big regulation, but it gets to exactly the point that you're making, which is the DSA is the result of a years-long process of democratically Europe trying to figure out what's the response to the massive power of big tech over their information environments. And so to give one example, they provide a mechanism that actually requires those companies that are considered the very largest platforms and search engines to do an assessment of the risk that they cause in the context of illegal content, which could include child sexual abuse material. That is really only doing that basic risk assessment that we should imagine all companies would do.
Exactly.
And then based on that, they're actually obligated to take mitigating measures against them.
Professor
So that's
Kate,
one example.
Yeah, I mean, this is bare minimum stuff here, right? Bare minimum.
Yep.
Risk assessment. What are we subjecting our children to?
Correct.
And so in your assessment, does the EU prioritize protecting kids and teens from content related to suicide and self-harm?
So the DSA is not content specific, right? It doesn't require any company, for example, to take down any particular kind of content. But in the risk assessment provision, it's pretty clear, and if you read the negotiating history around the DSA as well, it's pretty clear that this is one of the key issues that concerns Europeans and thus concerned the regulation as it was adopted.
Thank you. I really appreciate you being here to balance this out. So look, we got to follow the money here, okay? I want to draw your attention here to the visual here, okay? Trump inauguration fund, Amazon, $1 million, Meta, $1 million, Google, $1 million, Microsoft, $1 million, Apple, $1 million, OpenAI, $1 million, and the list goes on. This hearing is not about making the internet a safer place for kids. It's about harassing Europeans who are trying to do something. No, it's imperfect, but they're trying something, and we sit here twiddling our thumbs. There has never been a more important time than now to create some basic rules for big tech. Our kids are more important than these billionaires and their shareholders, period. If we truly want to protect our kids, we have to push back on unrestrained corporate power and try to retain some moral clarity in this moment.
Jill?
I was told I would have more time because there was a member that went over by a minute.
Sure, go right ahead.
We should be looking at any country around the globe who is actually trying to do something. And no, should we copy exactly what they're doing? No, but we shouldn't stick our heads in the sand and say that, oh, there's nothing we can do here. We cannot maintain the status quo and then go back to our constituents and look these parents in the eye and say that we're actually doing our jobs. The solutions are right in front of us if we would actually do the work here in this committee. And I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. I would just remind the gentlelady that Mr. Zuckerberg from Meta sent this committee a letter a year ago, August of last year, saying that the Biden administration pressured them to censor. They did it. They're sorry. They're not going to do it again, and they've changed policy. I said that in my opening statement. So we do think this committee's had a huge impact on protecting free speech. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we are examining a growing threat, the way that Europe and the UK are using so-called digital safety and competition laws to undermine American values and American innovation. The EU Digital Services Act and the UK's Online Safety Act go far beyond legitimate regulation. They empower foreign bureaucrats to label political dissent, even ordinary phrases like "take back our country," as hate speech. And they pressure US platforms to apply those censorship rules globally. At the same time, the EU's Digital Markets Act and the UK's DMCC deliberately single out American technology companies for punitive treatment, forcing them to share proprietary data and subsidize less innovative rivals. These laws are protectionist by design, and they put American jobs, innovation, and free speech at risk. Congress has a duty to push back. We must ensure that foreign governments cannot dictate what Americans are allowed to say online, nor use regulatory schemes and backdoor taxes on our most successful industries. I look forward to hearing from you all today and appreciate your testimony. Mr. Price, I am a former American judge, and as such, I know that laws must have clear, defined terms in order to be applied impartially and fairly and consistently. I'd like to return to the discussion of the OSA and specifically the requirement under which that for speech to be censored as a false communication, it must cause, quote, non-trivial psychological or physical harm. Would you share with us your perspective on the use of phrases such as non-trivial psychological harm and your view of whether it is possible for these terms to be applied uniformly, fairly, and consistently?
Good question.
I'm afraid I really can't, and you've hit the nail on the head, really, in terms of your question. These terms are extremely vague, and it's a long-standing principle of the common law that vagueness in the criminal law is repugnant.
And so, sir, is it your view that this is actually an appropriate or even enforceable regulatory scheme?
It's not appropriate, but they certainly intend to enforce it.
Mr. Reed, I'd like to turn back to the DMA's application to our companies and the concept of gatekeepers, which we touched on earlier today. Would you please describe how that operates and how these regulations are creating an unfair competitive advantage for European and Chinese firms at the expense of American companies?
Well, I think the primary problem with the way that the EU has set up the gatekeeper requirements is it's driving the largest companies to essentially pull back on the tools they build for my members from the frameworks that they build for the small businesses. Ironically, oftentimes these small guys are the ones that are going to compete with them because it allows them to say, well, in order to comply with the DMA, we need to remove various functions. And this isn't hypothetical. What we've seen so far in our discussions is they want to remove link-throughs. They want to remove other elements that they see as essentially keeping power in a few of the big companies. The irony is, of course, the small guy, not the medium-sized guy, not the billionaire, but the truly small guys actually need that foothold to step up. And so what it creates is an environment where, sure, there'll be some billionaire companies that will do well out of the DMA, but the thousandaires, those of us who are trying to get to that next level, are the ones who get crushed between the two giants.
Thank you. I yield the balance of my time to the chairman.
Hi, thank you. Mr. Price, I just want to make sure I understand exactly what's happening. A pastor gets arrested for what he said, but the guys who attacked him don't. Lucy Conley said things that she shouldn't have, probably. Not probably, definitely. What would Mr. Farage say? Intemperate, statements, but she took him down. She got more prison time than young violent offenders got. And Miss Rose Doherty, I believe, was praying silently outside, and she got charged. Is that all accurate?
The only point I would add is Rose Doherty, 74-year-old grandmother, was arrested for holding a sign that said, "Here to talk only if you want."
Oh, so she's praying silently, not saying anything, just a sign, right?
Just a sign, sir.
Oh, wow,
Yes,
wow. And if an American comments on this in a way that the DSA defines as disinformation, misinformation, hate speech, they can have their speech taken down as well. Is that accurate?
That is entirely accurate within the terms of the DSA.
That's the state of play. Mr. Reed, I would just point out, when Ms. Verkunen, the lady who took Mr. Breton's place, when she was here talking about how the Digital Markets Act could impact companies, she said, we don't have anyone in Europe complaining about the law. And my response was, that's because you don't have any companies. The way you defined it, according to Mr. Price, and you understand, it only includes American companies and one Chinese company. Is that right?
Well, the irony is there are a lot of smaller European companies that are complaining about the DMA. Not the idea that they need a competitive landscape, it's that it focuses on entirely the wrong thing. You hit it on the head. A lot of our members come here to get money to go back there to build products.
Yep. I'm sorry, they called votes. I do want to move quickly, and I shouldn't have went over. Mr. Garcia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here today for two reasons. One, because Republicans are in the pocket of big tech, and two, they want to distract us on their war on free speech and expression in the U.S. We all remember Trump's inauguration. The tech oligarchs were all there. Musk, Zuckerberg, Bezos, Cook, Pichet, and they looked like they won the presidency because they did. And they got what they paid for. Since taking office, Trump put out an AI action plan that could have been written by big tech, dropped enforcement provisions against tech companies, and tried to unlawfully fire 2 FTC commissioners who fought to hold these companies accountable. By the way, one successfully got back to work today, first day back. That's Rebecca Slaughter. Trump and his loyalists in Congress are also serving their corporate overlords by attacking the countries that actually try to rein in big tech. That's not innovation, that's corruption and oligarchy. The American people do not want corruption and oligarchy. They want leaders who have the backbone to stand up to big tech. to stop massive surveillance and protect data privacy and uphold freedom of speech. But the people least qualified to talk about freedom of expression are the ones that currently are cracking down on the First Amendment. As my colleagues have described, Trump and his fellow Republicans have banned words that the federal government can use. They've extorted media companies to punish news coverage they don't like, and they've weaponized the immigration system against people who have other views. They've suppressed economic data and other information that contradicts the propaganda machine and targeted medical research even and museum exhibits, all because they're afraid of words, history, and the truth. At the same time, Republicans are leading a historic crackdown on expression, and they're holding propaganda hearings like this and telling us to reject the evidence of our eyes and ears. Mr. Kaye, thank you for being here today. As I mentioned, this administration is using the immigration system to suppress speech, as we've seen Mahmoud Khalil, Mohsen Madawi, Mario Guevara, and many others being targeted and detained because of their speech, and in Guevara's case, his reporting. Could you please comment on the ongoing weaponization of immigration to trample freedom of expression?
Yes, each of those examples are accurate. And I think that as we've heard so many different examples of crackdowns or alleged crackdowns on different kinds of speech in the UK or in Europe or in the United States, we just have to be honest that there are crackdowns happening in the United States. It's not it's entirely accurate to say these kinds of content-based restrictions and punishments in the US are very serious interferences with freedom of expression, and it would just be important to acknowledge that as we're talking about other kinds of restrictions as well.
Thank you for that. It's really important that we not allow arsonists to pretend that they're firefighters, and we must not let Republican lies prevail. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We will do one more, then unfortunately we have to recess for votes. And I know you guys have been sitting there for 3 hours. You need a well-deserved restroom break. We'll see if we got some refreshments for you back there, hopefully. Mr. Harris is recognized, and we'll take a quick recess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this important issue, and to all of you that have shared on this panel today. Greatly appreciate your patience, excuse me, and your thoughtful answers. I've served as a pastor for 36 years, and so obviously I have a heightened sensitivity to the whole issue of when governments and institutions begin to talk about hate speech and the censorship of hate speech. And I guess one of the questions that I'm concerned about today, and I'll ask you, Mr. Price, because of your experience in this area, particularly with ADF, would you consider posting a Bible verse hate speech?
No.
And is saying there are only two genders hate speech?
I certainly wouldn't consider that hate speech.
And so, yet the UK's Online Safety Act, among other things, is requiring companies to take actions against content which, quote, incites hatred against people. And I guess my question is, again, Mr. Price, who is in charge of determining what constitutes content which incites hatred against people?
The regulator of the Online Safety Act is Ofcom, which is the statutory body, and the legislation itself includes what they call priority content. That's content that would be age restricted, encompasses things that are illegal outside or in real life, not online. The problem with that is that our pastor, Diamoudli, that I mentioned earlier, he was threatened. He was arrested under the Public Order Act, which talks about stirring up religious hatred for comparing Islam and Christianity. And so, on the basis that the Online Safety Act restricts something that's deemed to be a crime outside, that kind of content would be restricted, and I think that's extraordinary overreach.
And is hate speech, quote, objective?
Well, this is where I might just pick up on something Professor Kane said earlier in relation to hate speech. The problem with it is it's a tautology saying that incitement to hatred is speech that creates hatred. There have been attempts by the UN, like the Rabat Plan of Action, to try and, on the prosecution side, set out a more clear framework on it. But as far as European courts are concerned, I think that their jurisprudence in this area is essentially incoherent.
Right. Well, obviously, I oppose any hateful rhetoric that's expressed online, but at the end of the day, it's not the job of governments to police bad speech, especially when we'll never be able to agree on what actually constitutes bad speech. And at the end of the day, the best remedy for bad speech is good speech, not censorship, in my opinion. But I will also ask, there is currently a clash between social media platforms that value free speech and the laws of the UK, causing some companies to alter their terms of service. And Mr. Price, are American social media companies expected to comply with UK's Online Safety Act?
Yes, sir, they are.
And how does this impact the way in which companies set their terms of service?
We've seen this again and again when it comes to regulations from European regulators, either from Brussels or London, where companies, of course, commercial enterprises, setting and designing a system that complies with EU law often means setting something for their entire operations globally. And that we saw that again and again with GDPR. Every time you have to click, I don't want cookies, something, and Americans are exposed to this. That's as a result of, it's a complicated enough process, but of European regulation reaching into your online activity.
Well, again, this is a critically important issue, and you've done some incredible work, I know, with Alliance Defending Freedom. And I know, Mr. Price, you've defended witnesses criminally charged for praying near abortion clinics. One of those examples was Father Sean Goff, a Catholic priest who was charged for praying and holding a sign that read, "Praying for Free Speech." UK authorities allege that silent prayer near abortion clinics constitutes an attempt to coerce women who are considering abortions. And I just ask, is silent prayer coercive?
No, sir.
And should silent prayer and holding signs result in legal consequences?
Absolutely not.
So when pro-life activists are prosecuted for engaging in peaceful prayer and protest, what kind of message does that send to other pro-life activists in the UK?
I think it shows an extreme degree of intolerance. It shows police overreach, and ultimately, we have to go back systemically. The problem is these laws that are being created. They're incredibly vague, overbroad, whether it's by European regulators or UK regulators, and they're having a real impact on people's lives and their human right to free speech.
Well, as this committee has discussed previously, the FACE Act here in the United States has been used to go after pro-lifers, and I just pray we don't reach the point that such activists are arrested for silent prayer, as we've seen there. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back to the committee. We'll stand in recess for 15 minutes more or less. Restrooms and refreshments in the back for you guys. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, they're in recess. I may come back in 15 minutes. I am supposed to go shopping, not just for hair products, Alex, where the fridge is running low. So groceries need to happen. It was supposed to happen yesterday. Told the missus it's happening today. It's got to happen today. So tomorrow's stream, I should have a more dapper look, let's just say. But this was a good one. I did not know how bad things had gotten. I tend to be singular in my approach. I focus on oversight in the judiciary, unless it's, news that's huge, and I notice it. So some of this has gone not on my radar. The guy that was arrested in Heathrow, though, was on my radar. And so interesting to hear that come up a couple times today. In England, people have to pay for a TV license, and if they don't, they get arrested. Yeah, that's nuts. I've seen something like, I don't know if they get arrested, they just lose the TV, or access seems like a more fitting way to go about things. I don't know how this is why I think this is so interesting, because, the witnesses tend to be from America, American lawyers, and now we're, getting people, I'm not sure if any of them were barristers, but they do represent companies. Farage is a politician. He probably is. Farage a barrister? Question mark. Is politician member? I don't know if he is or isn't. Look, I don't follow. I'm not a royal watcher, if you will. But this has been a good one. It's good to ease back in. Look, this is my first stream back. August, we took off. I take off. But all the kids visited all their grandparents in August, so that was good. Spend time with the family. But we're back, and tomorrow we are back in the Senate, I believe, with a hearing on what do you ask? Well, let me tell you. So there's going to be, this is going to deviate a little bit from what we're used to. So right now they are on the judiciary. Jennifer Mascott is there for confirmation. But I was interested in something else, if I can find it. The hearings to examine the president's 2026 healthcare agenda, which is going to be in the Finance Committee. And why do you ask? Because Bobby Kennedy is going to be going before the Committee on Finance. And I'm very, I like to, I listen when Bobby Kennedy speaks. He's an attorney who I do look up to, who's done some great work over the years, challenging the government and private businesses where it's appropriate. Cleaned up the Hudson River, for instance, when paint factories would dump into the Hudson, changing it colors. Yeah, he cleaned up the Hudson River. I think founded River Keepers, which has grown into Water Keepers, which there's a little bit of a pendulum that swings there. Are we going too much into regulations, or they're not enough regulations? It's a constant swing. So that is what I would like to be streaming tomorrow. Unless something comes up so on point that we can't, that is probably what we're going to be streaming, the president's 2026 healthcare agenda. Also, I want to be introducing more Make America Healthy Again products. There's no stamp out there, right? Where, okay, this is a good product. I'd like to. So you've seen on the channel, I tend to introduce products that I like. I love Chomps, for instance. I think they're a great product. I'm going to, what are you guys and girls using? I want to know. Leave me a comment. If it's not here, somewhere else on the channel, anywhere else, I'll probably put up ask a question. What Make America Healthy Again products are you using? I would like to know about them. And then maybe feature them on the channel, because that's, a little thing I can do. The smallest little sliver is maybe just highlight some of the better things we should be replacing the not so great things with. That's my spiel. So I'm going to, I'll probably, this is a good place to end it. There weren't too many members left to speak. Farage is gone. It's essentially over. But if you want to just watch that stream, let me drop the link. I don't know if it's not going to be clickable for you necessarily. But this is where we're streaming it from. As I say, the House, this year I've been focusing more on the Senate, because the Senate doesn't put their stuff on YouTube natively, whereas the House stuff you can find. Good hair care product, yes. I go for L'Oreal, Zach. The House uploads instantly. They go live, and they're live on YouTube, right? So you can find a lot of the stuff in the House on YouTube. But the Senate, they archive their own videos. So a little more rare, which is why I focused on it a little more this year. But right now we're in the House. You can head over to YouTube and watch the rest of this hearing. It shouldn't be much longer. I think there might be 1 or 2 members left with questions. But with that said, I need to run. Thank you so much. I missed you guys. I missed you girls. I really did. I've been eager to come back for days, weeks. These last few days, I'm like, oh, I can't wait. Can't wait. Let's go. Thank you again for joining me. You could have watched this anywhere else. You came and joined me. I really appreciate that. Knowledge is power. Subscribe for more. Fight brain rot. Subscribe. User's choice. Take care. Be well. See y'all next time. Good to see you again, Alex. Glad you're back. Bye, everybody.